Ladies and gentlemen, we have made a lot of videos already on this channel about NFL quarterbacks, so I figured why not combine them all into one long video. We have Patrick Mahomes, Trevor Lawrence, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and exactly what is going on with all these players. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. You also got some greats in here like Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and many, many more. 9 players went before Patrick Mahomes in the 2017 NFL Draft. Today we're going to find out why that is, and not only are we going to go over how those players have turned out since, but I also want to figure out who the other quarterbacks drafted in this class were and how they compared to Mahomes at the end of the day. Let's start out with the number 1 pick. Coming into the 2017 draft, the Browns certainly could have taken a quarterback because the ones on the roster were, let's just say, not very good. Cody Kessler, Josh McCown, we had RG3, who was banged up from his time in Washington, Kevin Hogan, and Charlie Whitehurst. To be fair, the Browns needed a ton of help, not only on offense, but also defense, since they allowed the 3rd most amount of points in the league in 2016. They decided to take Myles Garrett at number 1, who's a defensive end, and this is a pick that you can't complain about at all, considering that he's been a Pro Bowler for the last 4 seasons, and a huge part in them actually turning things around for that franchise. Pick number 2, the Chicago Bears were up, and they would make a little bit more of a questionable decision with this pick. Coming into the draft, the Bears were battling it out with the Browns for one of the worst records in the league at 3-13. At this point in time, Jay Cutler was the starter for the beginning of the year, and he was far from the player he once was for them. The other quarterbacks on the roster were Matt Barkley and Brian Hoyer. Not necessarily starter material guys that you want to build a team around. So the Bears did go for a quarterback here, and they took Mitch Trubisky. Oh, what could have been for the Bears if they just went with Mahomes instead. To give them a bit of slack here, though, most analysts had Trubisky going over Mahomes in mock drafts. At the time, scouts thought that Mitch looked like an accurate quarterback with great footwork and the ability to process defenses not only quickly, but also correctly. Unfortunately, that dream of having a franchise quarterback would not last long for Bears fans, though. They had a good season in 2018, finishing the year 12-4, but in typical Bears fashion, lost in the wildcard game to the Eagles after the Cody Parkey double doinker incident. There was also a lot of talk about how him and Matt Nagy never truly got along and their relationship was always strained, with Trubisky at the end of the day feeling unwanted in Chicago. This led to him looking elsewhere and signing with the Bills in 2021. Now, he of course wouldn't get a chance to start here because you're not going to bench Josh Allen for Mitch Trubisky, so after that season ended, he ended up in Pittsburgh, and so far that has not turned out too great either. The Steelers have just been, just a mediocre team coasting to a positive record throughout the last 2 seasons and not making it much further. He's also swapping in and out of that starting role with Kenny Pickett, even though neither of them have shown they have what it takes to win consistently. Pick number 3 here, the 49ers took Solomon Thomas, who is a defensive end. They weren't in the market for a quarterback around this time because they were hoping Jimmy G would be the starter for them. Unfortunately, he couldn't stop getting hurt, which became a big problem for them at the end of the day. But back to Solomon Thomas. He had a decent rookie season, but overall struggled in San Francisco. And after his rookie season, his sister ended up committing suicide, which I'm sure wore down his mental health quite a bit and made it very difficult to focus primarily on football. After his time in San Fran came to an end, he moved on to the Raiders and now plays for the Jets, who had one of the best defenses, if not the best defense, this season. If they could just figure out that offensive situation, they might be able to make a playoff run next year. Number 4, we have Leonard Fournette, taken by the Jaguars. If you watch football regularly, does it not seem like Fournette was drafted like 10 years ago? I swear you could have fooled me and said he was like 32 years old, and I would totally believe you, but nope, he's only 29. The Jaguars were content sticking with Blake Bortles at the quarterback position, and it looked like it was going to pay off in 2017 because they made it all the way to the AFC title game before losing to the Patriots. Let's be real here, though, and say it was like 95% because of their defense that they made it that far. I mean, they had prime Jalen Ramsey, Calais Campbell was on the team, AJ Boye, Ngakoue, and Telvin Smith, all of which made the Pro Bowl that season. After that season, though, they fell off pretty hard. It was basically a one-hit wonder season for Bortles and the Jags. Lenny rushed for 1,000+ yards 2 out of the 3 seasons with the Jaguars before moving on to the Bucs, being a great pass-catching running back and complement to Tom Brady and getting his Super Bowl ring in the process. And now this past season, he was the backup, I believe, for the Bills in 2023 behind James Cook and Latavius Murray. Who knows if he's going to take over that actual backup role in 2024 if he even stays with the team. Overall, I didn't hate this pick for the Jags, though, with Leonard Fournette. I'm sure they'd rather have Mahomes over Fournette, but it could have been a lot worse. Hopefully, Trevor Lawrence pans out for them over the long term. Number 5, though, was a pick that wouldn't pan out great for the team that drafted him. Corey Davis was taken by the Titans and was supposed to be a number 1 receiver that they could count on for many years to come. They needed him to be that guy because the year prior, Rashard Matthews led the receiving core for them. I would be willing to bet that 75% of you guys watching this video right now don't even know who that guy is.
Who are you?
Now, having drafted Marcus Mariota just 2 seasons prior, they weren't ready to give up on him yet, so it's understandable not taking Mahomes here. Nonetheless, Corey Davis was just alright during his time with the Titans, but not good enough for a top 5 pick overall, in my opinion. Plus, once A.J. Brown got to Tennessee, it was pretty clear he was the more talented receiver. After 2020, Davis found himself on the Jets, where his career would really start to go downhill. He couldn't stay healthy with them, and after just 22 games over the course of 2 seasons, Davis decided to retire from football early. Up at number 6, the Jets took safety Jamal Adams. They honestly could have taken Mahomes here because the quarterbacks on the roster were Josh McCown and Bryce Petty. Ugh. I mean, I'm sure they regret that decision now, but Jamal Adams actually played very well during his time in New York. He played 3 total seasons there and made the Pro Bowl in 2 of them. Following 2019, Adams was traded to the Seahawks, and after his first year in Seattle, making the Pro Bowl yet again, I personally think he hasn't been the same player since. Maybe I'm just delusional, but every time I watch a Seahawks game, it feels like when he's on the field, Adams is either just missing tackles or getting burnt over the top. Pair that with the fact that he's missed a ton of games due to injuries recently, I would say his career has been trending in the wrong direction. Moving on to number 7, wide receiver Mike Williams was drafted by the Chargers. Now, the Chargers at the time already had Phillip Rivers, who was a seasoned veteran at quarterback. You can't really blame them for holding on to him after all he'd done for that team. This also paid off for LA in the short term because Rivers made the Pro Bowl during the 2017 and 2018 seasons while leading them to positive records both seasons. As for Williams, though, so far throughout his career, he has shown glimpses of greatness here and there, notching 2 1,000-yard seasons so far, that he can be a solid deep threat for Justin Herbert currently. My only problem right now with Williams is that his injuries have been taking a huge toll on him for the past couple of years now. I just hope he can stay healthy enough to have a lengthy career. Number 8 doesn't even really require a discussion on whether they should have taken Mahomes or not. The Panthers took Christian McCaffrey, and they made the correct choice here. Safe to say that CMC saved this team from being absolutely unbearable most of his years with the team. This is the best running back in the league every single year that he's healthy, and it was long overdue that he switched teams and got off the Panthers onto the 49ers, where he hopes to get himself a Super Bowl ring in 2024 if they can take down the Kansas City Chiefs. Number 9 here was a debatable choice looking back on things. The Bengals went with wide receiver John Ross, who was the fastest player ever according to his 40-yard dash time of 4.22 seconds. They did need a wide receiver, however, because they just lost Mohamed Sanu and Marvin Jones Jr., but Ross ultimately didn't work out in the league due to a couple of different factors. Number 1 is that he got off to a terrible start to his career, fumbling on his only carry in his first season. After that was number 2, and the biggest reason that he failed, it was because he was injured a ton. It was too little too late by 2020 when the Bengals drafted T. Higgins, who has turned out to be a much better wide receiver than Ross. Ross then found himself on the Giants to finish out his career, where he caught just 11 passes in 10 games for a little over 200 yards. Currently, of course, Joe Burrow looks like that franchise quarterback that the Bengals have needed for some time now. They just have to get him back and healthy for next season. All right, now that we've covered all 9 picks before Mahomes, like I said earlier, I want to figure out what happened to the other quarterbacks in this draft, starting with pick number 12, Deshaun Watson, taken by Houston. I mean, I think it's pretty clear what he's known for at this point in time. The old happy ending massage treatment, except, you know, the people giving the massage weren't necessarily interested, if that makes any sense. You guys know what I mean. Anyways, on the field, Watson was great for the Texans. I mean, I would go as far to say that he was one of the best in the league during his time with the team, making the Pro Bowl 3 out of 4 seasons with the team, and then exploding in 2020. Led the league in passing yards, yards per pass completion, and yards per pass attempt that year. After the whole massage therapist thing was over and done with, he landed himself in Cleveland, where so far he just really hasn't looked like the same player to me. Maybe he can come back next season and prove himself, but as of right now, he's nothing more than a mid-tier quarterback in my eyes. I know he hasn't been fully healthy, but even when he's been healthy, nothing too amazing. Next quarterback taken was all the way in round 2 at pick number 52. Ironically, the Browns took one, DeShone Kizer. What a disaster this was. He started all of 2017 and went, ready for this? 0-15 with 11 touchdowns and 22 interceptions total. After that, he ended up as Aaron Rodgers' backup in Green Bay and never started another game in the NFL. He was out of the league after the 2018 season. QB5 in this draft was Davis Webb, drafted by the Giants. Webb didn't play in a single game until 2021, where he made his debut on the Bills just to take 2 kneels. Other than that, he started in 1 game for the Giants in the 2022-23 season and threw for 168 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and a passing touchdown against the Eagles in Week 18. QB6 was CJ Beathard, taken by the 49ers at pick 104 in the 3rd round. Beathard actually started here and there because of those consistent injuries that Jimmy G was going through during his time with the Niners, but couldn't turn the tide enough in his favor for the Niners to give him that starting role permanently because his record as a starter was 2-10. Pretty bad. Since 2020, he has been a backup on the Jaguars just in case anything happens to Trevor Lawrence. He went 1-0 this season though, so things might be looking up for the guy. You never know. QB7 was none other than Joshua Dobbs, taken by Pittsburgh at pick 135 in the 4th round. Now, Dobbs didn't get too many notable starts until this recent 2023 season, where he was basically everybody's Superman, America's Superman, for 2 games in Minnesota, and then he fell off unbelievably hard, got benched by Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall right after that, but did have a short little insanity run. If we just ignore the fall off, it's all great. It's all fine and dandy. Hopefully he comes back and performs well in 2024. QB8 was Nathan Peterman, taken by the Bills at pick 171 in the 5th round. So far in his career, Peterman has spent time with not only the Bills, but also the Raiders and currently the Bears. He has a 1-4 record as a starter when given the chance up to this point, so also not very good. QB9 was Brad Kaya, who never got any action in the NFL after being drafted 215th overall by the Lions. And last but not least, QB10 Chad Kelly, taken at pick number 253 by Denver. He got into 1 NFL game, took 1 kneel, finished off his career with -1 rushing yards. Funny thing about Chad Kelly is he was actually a Mia Khalifa super fan for a little while. Tried sliding in her DMs. That didn't go to plan. And then he got kicked out of the NFL for trespassing after a Von Miller Halloween party. I don't know what was going on there, but it was not good for Chad Kelly. Guys, I think it's pretty safe to say that none of these quarterbacks in this draft class even compared to Mahomes. There were a couple picks before him that we went over earlier in the video it was respectable decisions. What do you guys think in the comments section? Who would you rather have your team built around? CMC when he was a rookie or Patrick Mahomes? One of the toughest feats at the quarterback position has to be throwing for 5,000 yards in a single season. This is something that's only been accomplished 15 total times and only done by 9 different quarterbacks throughout the league's over 100+ year history. To break down just how tough of an achievement this is, for a QB to hit 5,000 yards back when the regular season was 16 games, he had to play every single week and throw for an average of 312.5 yards every game. Since 2021, when the 17-game regular season was introduced, this average drops to a still impressive 294.2 yards per game. Today, I want to take a look at every 5,000+ yard passing season and break down just how dominant each quarterback was. Starting things off with Dan Marino. Marino was a quarterback that was well ahead of his time. During the 80s, the level of play at the quarterback position was far from what it is today. But Marino is still one of the few players from his era whose numbers still age well, even with today's quarterbacks being much more athletic. In 1984, he became the first player in history to pass for 5,000 yards. He finished the season completing 362 out of his 564 pass attempts for 5,084 yards, 48 touchdowns, and 17 interceptions. Marino blew away the competition this season, leading the league in completions, pass attempts, passing yards, and passing touchdowns. This insane season earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl, on the All-Pro First Team, and he took home the Offensive Player of the Year and MVP awards. Along with this, he led the Miami Dolphins to a 14-2 record. 9 out of the 16 games that he played during that season, he threw for over 300 yards, and he also exceeded the 400-yard mark in 4 of them. His strongest passing performance of that entire season came in Week 14 when the Dolphins took on the Raiders. Marino lit up the Raiders secondary for 470 yards and 4 touchdowns. He did end up throwing 2 interceptions though, with a completion percentage of 61.4%. And while this was a game to remember for Marino, the Dolphins still suffered a crushing 34-45 loss. Miami did make it all the way to the Super Bowl this year before eventually losing to the 49ers 38-16. When the lights were the brightest, Marino was just outdueled by Joe Montana. Montana ended up throwing 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, while Marino finished with just 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. It was nearly a quarter of a century before another player was able to join Marino in the 5,000-yard club. Drew Brees became the second player in NFL history to eclipse that 5,000-yard mark in 2008. He finished that season completing 413 of his 635 passes for 5,069 yards, 34 touchdowns, and 17 interceptions. Despite this being the golden era of quarterbacks, some might say, nobody was coming close to touching Brees' passing numbers in this season, with him leading the league in completions, pass attempts, passing yards, and passing touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl, on the All-Pro Second Team, and he also took home the Offensive Player of the Year award. Despite his elite level of play, the Saints still finished with a mediocre 8-8 record. Had they fared better in the regular season, there's definitely a chance that Brees would have walked away with an MVP award this season as well. Brees threw for 300 plus yards in 10 out of the 16 games that he played in and broke over 400 yards twice. His highest yardage game of that season came in week number 10 when the Saints took on their division rival Atlanta Falcons. Despite Brees being a bit too loose with the ball, only completing 53.5% of his passes and throwing 3 interceptions, he still tore up Atlanta's secondary for 422 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, due in part to the 3 turnovers by Brees in this game, the Saints were defeated by a final score of 34-20. Now, it did not take too long for Drew Brees to accomplish the feat of 5,000 yards in a season for the second time in his career, doing so just 3 seasons later in 2011. Brees finished that season completing 468 of his 657 passes for 5,476 yards, 46 touchdowns, and only 14 interceptions. He led the league in completions, completion percentage at 71.2%, passing yards, and passing touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl, on the All-Pro Second Team, and won him the Offensive Player of the Year award yet again. Saints fared much better this year than in 2008 as they finished with a 13-3 record. Brees threw for 300 plus yards in 13 out of the 16 games that he played in and threw for more than 400 yards in 2 of them. While his season high was 419 yards, his best game came in Week 15 when the Saints took on the Vikings, where Brees threw for 412 yards, 5 touchdowns, and did not throw a single interception, with a completion percentage of 80%, which is mind-blowing. New Orleans won by a final score of 42-20. Once the playoffs came around, Brees continued his insane level of play. In the wildcard game against the Lions, he threw for 466 yards, 3 touchdowns, and yet again had 0 interceptions, which helped New Orleans to a 17-point win. Unfortunately, the divisional round matchup against the 49ers would be a bit too much for the Saints defense to handle. Brees did all he could though, throwing for another 466 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions on an unbelievable 63 pass attempts. The Saints were ultimately bounced from the playoffs that day, but Brees had a year to remember, all while setting the NFL record at the time for most passing yards in a single season. In that same season, Brees was joined by some elite company, with Tom Brady also throwing for 5,000 yards. It would not be a list of passing achievements without the greatest of all time making an appearance at least one time. He finished the season completing 401 out of his 611 attempts for 5,235 yards, 39 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. Despite this elite season, Brady only earned himself a Pro Bowl spot for all his efforts. Brady led the Patriots to a 13-3 record that year and even threw for over 500 yards in one of those games. That historic matchup for Brady took place in week number 1, where he started the season off with an elite 517 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception while completing 66.7% of his passes. New England went on to win that game against the Dolphins by a commanding 14 points, and this also set what ended up being a career high in single-game passing yards from Tom Brady. Now, the Patriots made it pretty deep in the playoffs that year, all the way to the Super Bowl, before it finally ended at the hands of Tom Brady's kryptonite, Eli Manning and the New York Giants. Shockingly, Brees and Brady were not the only quarterbacks to throw for 5,000 yards in 2011. Matthew Stafford rounded out the trio of players to accomplish this feat in the historic season. Thus far, this is the only season in NFL history in which 3 players have done this. Stafford finished the season completing 421 out of his 663 pass attempts for 5,038 yards, 41 touchdowns, and 16 interceptions, leading the league in passing attempts. To make things even more impressive, he did this just 1 year removed from getting surgery to repair his AC joint separation in his shoulder. This earned himself the Comeback Player of the Year award, but it was also the only accolade that he did win that season. Stafford led the Lions to a 10-6 record, and similar to Brady, he also threw for over 500 yards in a single game. His historic day took place in week number 17 on New Year's, where the Lions took on the Green Bay Packers. Stafford threw for 520 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions while completing 61% of his pass attempts. This still stands as a career high for single-game passing yards for Stafford. However, even with his mind-blowing performance, they still somehow lost by a final score of 45-41. Once they reached the playoffs in that season, they unfortunately had to go up against Drew Brees and the Saints in the wildcard game. The Saints took this game by 17 points, but Stafford still finished that day with 380 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions in that loss. In 2012, Drew Brees was the sole quarterback to hit that 5,000-yard mark. As a result of this, he established himself as the first and only player in NFL history to ever accomplish this feat in back-to-back seasons. He finished the year completing 422 out of his 670 pass attempts for 5,177 yards, 43 touchdowns, and 19 interceptions, leading the league in passing yards, passing touchdowns, and interceptions. However, he was only awarded with a spot in the Pro Bowl for all his efforts. A likely contributing factor in this is the fact that the Saints struggled to a 7-9 record. Brees finished the season throwing for 300+ yards in 10 out of the 16 games that he played in this season, and 400+ in 2 of them. His best game of that season came in Week 16 when the Saints took on the Cowboys. Brees finished that game with 446 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. The Saints came out on top by a final score of 34-31. I feel like there isn't a more fitting transition away from Drew Brees than to the person who broke his single-season passing record by just 1 single yard. Just 2 years after coming back from a neck injury and missing the entire season, Peyton Manning was one of the 2 quarterbacks to throw for 5,000+ yards in 2013. Shockingly, Manning was able to accomplish this feat for the first time in his career at the age of 37. He lit the league up this season, completing 450 out of his 659 pass attempts for 5,477 yards and 55 touchdowns, both of which are NFL records that still stand to this day. He led the league in passing completions, pass attempts, passing yards, and passing touchdowns, while leading the Denver Broncos to a 13-3 record. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl, an All-Pro first-team appearance, and he took home both the Offensive Player of the Year and MVP awards. Manning threw for 300+ yards in 12 out of the 16 games that he played in this season, and 400+ in 4 of them. His best game of that season came in Week 1, where the Broncos took on the Ravens. Manning started his season off on the right foot, putting up a ridiculous 462 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions while completing 64.3% of his passes. Not only did Denver secure a dominant 49-27 win to begin their year, but Manning also tied the NFL record for the most passing touchdowns in a single game on that day. During the playoffs, Manning continued to play well against the Chargers and the Patriots before throwing 2 picks against the Seahawks and getting blown out 43-8 in the Super Bowl. Now at this point, guys, it shouldn't even be a shock that Drew Brees threw for 5,000 yards once again in the 2013 season. He's the most popular name on this list for a reason today. Brees finished that year completing 446 out of his 650 pass attempts for 5,162 yards and 39 touchdowns. Once again, he was awarded only a Pro Bowl appearance for another 5,000-yard season, even with him leading the Saints to an improved 11-5 record this time around. His best performance of that season came in week number 4 against the Dolphins. Brees finished the matchup with 413 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, while completing 76.9% of his passes. Along with this extremely strong performance from Brees, the Saints also came out on top with a dominant 38-17 win. Once the playoffs rolled around this year for New Orleans, they slipped by the Eagles in the wildcard game, even with Brees having an off day, then finally lost to the Seahawks in the divisional round. Drew didn't have a terrible game against Seattle, they just had a really tough time getting into the end zone. Now, in both the 2014 and 2015 seasons, 0 quarterbacks were able to eclipse the 5,000-yard mark. However, I know this is going to be a huge shocker. The sole player to do it in 2016, take your guesses. Yeah, it was Drew Brees yet again. This will be the final time that he's on this list, though. It was the final 5,000-yard season that he ever had, with him already being 37 years old in the 2016 season. He finished that year completing 471 out of his 673 passes for 5,208 yards and 37 touchdowns. Despite this elite effort, the Saints once again just barely scraped by to a 7-9 record. Brees only earned himself a trip to the Pro Bowl this season, even with him leading the league in pass completions, pass attempts, and passing yards. His best game of that season came in Week 6 when the Saints took on the Carolina Panthers. In this matchup, Brees threw for 465 yards, 4 touchdowns, and just 1 interception while completing 69.4% of his passes. Even with this very strong performance out of their QB, the Saints were only able to narrowly escape with a 41-38 win. While no quarterbacks were able to reach the 5,000-yard mark in the 2017 season, Ben Roethlisberger was one of 2 that pulled it off in 2018. Shockingly, this is the first time in his career that Big Ben accomplished this feat, doing so at the age of 36. He finished that season completing 452 out of his 675 passes for 5,129 yards and 34 touchdowns. He led the league in completions, passing attempts, passing yards, and even interceptions with 16. Whether it was due to the league-leading amount of interceptions or the Steelers finishing that season with a 9-6-1 record, Roethlisberger didn't even make the Pro Bowl, which is pretty surprising. He threw for 300-plus yards in half of the games that he played in this season and had 2 games over 400 yards. While his season high was 462 yards in a game, his best game came in Week 2 against the Kansas City Chiefs, where he threw for 452 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions while completing 65% of his passes. Despite that strong performance, the Steelers were still defeated by a final score of 42-37. The quarterback who defeated Roethlisberger in that Week 2 matchup ended up being the only player that joined him in the 5,000-yard club that season. Despite it being his first year as a full-time starter, Patrick Mahomes made it a season to remember, completing 383 out of his 580 passes for 5,097 yards and 50 touchdowns, leading the league in passing touchdowns and touchdown percentage. Along with this, he led the Chiefs to an incredible 12-4 record. This amazing year with Mahomes coming out of nowhere earned himself a Pro Bowl appearance, All-Pro First Team spot, and he won the Offensive Player of the Year and MVP awards. His best game of that year took place in week number 11 against the Los Angeles Rams. This was the high-scoring matchup that I'm positive 99% of you guys remember, where Mahomes was dueling with Jared Goff. Pat finished that matchup with 478 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions while completing 71.7% of his passes. Despite this gutsy performance from the young quarterback, they fell just short in a shootout, 54-51. Mahomes also added on 2 lost fumbles during that matchup, which gave the Rams just enough opportunity to squeak this one out. During round 1 of the playoffs that season, the Chiefs rolled past the Colts by 18 points, but eventually got outmatched by Tom Brady and the Patriots in the conference championship. Here we go. This one is very interesting to say the least. Arguably the most shocking player on this entire list earned his spot in 2019. In this season, Jameis Winston had a historic year that many still don't know what to make of to this day. He finished the year completing 380 out of his 626 passes for 5,109 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 30 interceptions. He led the league in passing attempts, passing yards, and of course, interceptions. Along with this, he became the first player in NFL history to ever finish a season with 30 or more touchdowns and 30 or more interceptions. I'm not really sure that's the kind of record you want to be known for, but it is what it is. Due to his league-leading number of interceptions, paired with the fact that the Bucs finished the season 7-9, Winston did not receive any awards or nominations that season. He threw for 300-plus yards in 11 out of his 16 games that he played in, 400-plus yards in 3 out of the games as well. Strongest showing of that season came in Week 15 when the Bucs took on the Lions. Winston finished that matchup with 458 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception while completing 66.7% of his passes in a dominant 38-17 win. Just another testament to his generational longevity. An entire decade after his first 5,000-yard passing season, Tom Brady was back again with his second in 2021, joining Drew Brees as the only players to ever have multiple 5,000-plus yard seasons at the time. This year, Brady completed 485 out of his 719 passes for 5,316 yards and 43 touchdowns, leading the league in completions, passing attempts, passing yards, and passing touchdowns. Arguably, the most impressive thing about this entire season is the fact that Brady accomplished all of this at 44 years old and only threw 12 interceptions. Along with this, he led the Bucs to a 13-4 record. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro second team. He threw for 300-plus yards in 9 out of the 17 games that he played in and eclipsed 400 yards 3 times that season. And just coming off that Super Bowl the year prior, Brady and the Bucs were barely outmatched in the divisional round of the playoffs after losing to the Rams 30-27. Now we're going to move on to a player who accomplished this insane feat in only his second season as a starter. Justin Herbert joined this list of elite quarterbacks that make up the 5,000-yard club in the 2021 season as well. He finished that year completing 443 out of his 672 attempts for 5,014 yards and 38 touchdowns. Along with this, he led the Chargers to a 9-8 record. This earned himself the first Pro Bowl appearance of his career. Herbo's strongest passing performance came in week number 5 when the Chargers took on the Browns. Herbert diced up the Cleveland secondary for 398 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions while completing 60.5% of its passes. LA narrowly escaped by a final score of 47-42. 9-8 unfortunately wasn't good enough to sneak the Chargers into the playoffs, and I'm not sure if everybody remembers, but the last game of that season was against the Raiders, and if the two teams had tied on that day, they would have both got in. In 2022, Patrick Mahomes became the most recent player to ever throw for 5,000 plus yards. This season put him alongside Drew Brees and Tom Brady as the only players in history to accomplish this feat multiple times. He finished the season completing 435 out of his 648 pass attempts for 5,250 yards and 41 touchdowns, leading the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns while keeping his interceptions down to just 12. Along with this, he led the Chiefs to a 14-3 record. His incredible numbers paired with his team's success led to Mahomes being named to the Pro Bowl and All-Pro first team, along with taking home the MVP award. He passed for 300 plus yards in 10 out of the 17 games that he played in that season and threw for 400 yards in 2 of those games. While his season high was 446 passing yards, his strongest performance came in Week 7 against the San Francisco 49ers, where he threw for 423 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception while completing 73.5% of his pass attempts against a very talented 49ers defense. As a result of this elite air raid, the Chiefs came out on top by a final score of 44-23. Mahomes is also the only player on our list today that won the Super Bowl after throwing for 5,000 plus yards in a season. Kansas City defeated the Eagles in a crazy high-scoring game, 38-35. Mahomes only finished that day with 182 passing yards, but threw 3 touchdowns and not a single interception. Barring any injuries, there is definitely a strong chance that Mahomes will make a return to this list in the near future. As long as he can get some receivers on his side, I think he'll be good. To me personally, one of the most impressive achievements for a quarterback is to throw for 7 touchdowns in a single game. I mean, in most of the games that you watch, it's pretty difficult for an entire team to even put up 7 touchdowns against an NFL defense, let alone get 7 scores through the air. Throughout the over 100-year history of the NFL, only 8 quarterbacks have been able to pull off this feat. Today we're breaking down who each of these quarterbacks are and how they accomplished it. The first instance of a quarterback throwing for 7 touchdowns takes us all the way back to the 1943 season when Sid Luckman did so as a member of the Bears. Luckman was an extremely versatile player who throughout his career spent time playing the running back and defensive back positions along with quarterback. Throughout the 1943 season, Luckman was playing at an extremely high level for a quarterback in this era, but his performances leading up to Week 9 paled in comparison to what he had in store for the Giants. The Bears came into this game with an incredible 6-0-1 record, while the Giants, not so much. They were struggling to a 2-2-1 record. Luckman got the game off to a hot start, throwing for 2 touchdowns in only the first quarter. The first going to Jim Benton for a 4-yard score, while the second was pulled in by Connie McBarry for 31 yards. While the Giants were able to respond with the passing touchdown of their own to open up the second quarter, it didn't take long for Luckman to find Hampton Poole for a 27-yard score. Heading into halftime, the Bears held a commanding 28-7 lead. However, they kept their foot on the gas in the second half as well. In the third quarter, Luckman hit Harry Clark for a 62-yard touchdown before finding Jim Benton for his second touchdown grab of the game, this one from 15 yards out. Even though the Bears were up 42-7 at this point in time, heading into the fourth quarter, the air raid continued. Luckman threw an additional 2 touchdowns in the fourth, finding George Wilson for a 3-yard score, and finally Hampton Poole getting his second touchdown of that game, this time from 40 yards out. By the time the game was over, Chicago held a dominating 56-7 lead, earning their 7th win of the year and keeping their no-loss season alive. Luckman filled up the stat sheet in this one, completing 65.6% of his passes for 433 yards, 7 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. Luckman went on to have an incredible season, by the way, highlighted, of course, by this game. He finished out the regular season with 2,194 yards and 28 touchdowns through the air, leading the league in both metrics and earning himself a spot on the All-Pro First Team, all in just 10 games. The Bears also beat the Redskins in the championship that year 41-21, and Sid Luckman had a game to remember: 286 yards through the air, 5 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Next up, we're going to jump to the 1954 season to take a look at Adrian Burke. Leading up to this season, Burke had mainly served as a backup quarterback, only starting in every game that he played in during one of the 4 seasons that he'd been in the league. However, he did begin the 1954 season as the starting QB of the Eagles. Leading up to Week 4, when the Eagles took on the Redskins, he had Philadelphia off to a hot 3-0 start. On the flip side, Washington did not get off to a hot start, failing to even win a single game heading into week number 4. Philly took full advantage of this mismatch, with Burke finding Bobby Walston on a 26-yard pass for the first score of that game. However, Washington quickly responded with a touchdown of their own, knotting the score up at 7-all to end the first quarter. Burke and the Eagles controlled the second quarter, though, with him finding Pete Pihos for both scores in that quarter. The first touchdown was from 18 yards out, while the second was from 19. Heading into halftime, the Eagles found themselves up 21-7, and early in the third, Burke kept up his dominant day through the air, finding Bobby Walston for his second touchdown reception of that day, this one from 5 yards out. While Washington returned a kickoff following this score, Burke Burke led Philadelphia down the field and once again hit Bobby Walston for his third touchdown of that day, this one from 4 yards out. Heading into the fourth quarter, the Eagles found themselves up 35-14. Burke kept his foot on the gas and continued the passing raid, throwing for 2 more touchdowns before the final whistle had sounded. On the first score, he hit Toy Ledbetter for a 9-yard touchdown, while Pete Pihos caught his final touchdown of that game, his third of the day. Philadelphia came out with a dominant victory by a final score of 49-21. Burke finished the contest with 242 yards, 7 touchdowns, and just 1 interception on only 27 pass attempts. Shockingly, not even this performance was enough to keep his starting position safe for the season. He was benched in weeks 7 through 10 before taking over once again in the starting role for week 11. Even though he spent some time coming off the bench that year, Burke still finished the season with 1,740 yards and 23 touchdowns, leading the league in passing touchdowns and earning himself a spot in the Pro Bowl. Now we move on to the 1961 season to cover one of the most interesting quarterbacks from this era, George Blanda. Blanda saw an immense amount of individual success as a member of the Houston Oilers and was a player who was far ahead of his time. Arguably the best game from his 7 seasons with the team came in week 11 when the Houston Oilers took on the New York Titans. Coming into this matchup, the Oilers posted a record of 5-3-1 while the Titans were attempting to keep their heads above water at 5-4. Blanda kicked off this game completely locked in, throwing 3 touchdown passes in only the first quarter. The first score was off a 28-yard touchdown pass to Charlie Hennigan, while Billy Cannon pulled in the final 2 touchdowns of that quarter, the first being 6 yards and the second on a 78-yard touchdown. While the Titans responded with a touchdown pass of their own to open up the second quarter, Blanda threw for an additional 2 touchdown passes. Billy Groman was on the receiving end of a 66-yard dart for the first score, while Cannon caught his 3rd touchdown of that game, this one from 6 yards out. Heading to the half, Houston held a commanding 35-6 lead. In the second half, Groman pulled in his 2nd and 3rd touchdowns of that game, the first from 46 yards and the second from 11. This wound up being Blanda's final touchdown pass of that game and the Oilers' final score. They came out on top by a final score of 49-13. Blanda picked the Titans apart in this one, throwing for 418 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 1 interception on 32 pass attempts. Despite only starting in 11 games during the 1961 season, Blanda finished the regular season throwing for 3,330 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 22 interceptions, leading the league in both passing yards and passing touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro First Team, and he was named AFL Player of the Year. Interestingly, Blanda continued to serve as the starting quarterback in the NFL until he was 48 years old. It's pretty unlikely that we're ever going to see another player continue to perform at an NFL level for this long ever again. Similar to Sid Luckman, the Houston Oilers also took home the championship this year that Blanda threw for 7 touchdowns. It was a very ugly game to say the least. The Oilers came out on top against the San Diego Chargers 10-3. George Blanda had 5 interceptions in that game, and on the opposite side of the ball, Jack Kemp had 4 interceptions in that game. Kemp throwing for 0 touchdowns, Blanda throwing for the only touchdown of that game. 1 year later, another quarterback would rise to the occasion and throw for 7 touchdowns in a single game, that player being Y.A. Tittle. Tittle was a starter for the Giants and gave fans a game to remember when they took on the Redskins in week number 7. Both sides were evenly matched heading into this one, with the Giants with a 4-2 record while Washington was 4-0-2. Washington's quarterback Norm Snead opened up the game with a 44-yard touchdown to Bobby Mitchell. However, Tittle and the Giants quickly responded with a 22-yard touchdown of their own from Tittle to Joe Morrison. Heading into the second quarter, the game was tied at 7-all, and both quarterbacks went back and forth throughout the first half, and heading into halftime, the Giants held a narrow 21-13 lead. But after a quick score from the Redskins to open up the second half, New York completely took off. Tittle went unconscious, throwing for 4 unanswered touchdowns, 1 to Del Schaffner for 53 yards, 1 to Frank Gifford for 63 yards, and 2 to Joe Walton for 26 and 6 yards. After this scoring outburst, the Giants were up 49-20, and the game was completely out of reach for Washington. While the Redskins were able to close out the game with 2 unanswered touchdowns of their own, the Giants still comfortably won this one 49-34. Snead had a very respectable game, throwing for 346 yards and 4 touchdowns. However, even this incredible showing was nothing in comparison to Tittle, who posted 505 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Tittle continued to shine throughout the remainder of the regular season also, finishing his 1962 campaign with 3,224 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 20 interceptions, leading the league in passing touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro First Team, and he came in second place in the MVP voting, just behind Packers fullback Jim Taylor. On to the 1969 season now. I think we're going to cover the least known quarterback on this list, Joe Kapp. Kapp was a very streaky player, and coming into every week, you didn't know exactly which version of him you were going to get. While he showed flashes of being a player who could develop into a great player, he also had his fair share of games in which he looked completely unstartable. However, his first appearance of the 1969 season as a starter for the Vikings was one of the greatest single-game performances that we have ever seen from a quarterback. Both the Vikings and the Colts came into this game with a 0-1 record, and Minnesota was even 2-point underdogs coming into this one. They did come out of the gates hot though because of their quarterback. By the end of the first quarter, he had already had 2 touchdowns under his belt, the first an 18-yard dot to Dave Osborne, while the second was an 83-yard bomb to Gene Washington. While the Colts opened up the second quarter with a passing touchdown of their own, Kapp and the Vikings offense went back to work. Kapp threw for 2 more touchdowns in the second quarter, the first a 21-yard touchdown to Bob Grimm, while Kent Kramer pulled in the second from 13 yards out. Along with this, Fred Cox also knocked down a 40-yard field goal for Minnesota. So heading into the half, the Vikings held a commanding 31-7 lead. They were far from done at that point in time though. They kept their foot on the gas heading out of the locker room, where Gene Washington pulled in his second touchdown, this one from 42 yards. Minnesota also put the nail in the coffin late in the third and in the fourth, with Kapp throwing 2 more touchdowns, the first a 1-yard pass to John Beasley, and Jim Lindsey scoring the final touchdown of the game from 15 yards out. Minnesota ran an absolute track meet, scoring a crazy 52 points to Baltimore's 14. Even though he took on Johnny Unitas, Kapp was clearly the better quarterback on this day, throwing for 449 yards, 7 touchdowns, and just 1 interception to Unitas' 68 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Kapp finished that season with 1,726 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions, while leading the Vikings to a very impressive 12-1 record as a starter. He earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl and finished in second in MVP voting, only behind Los Angeles Rams quarterback Roman Gabriel. Interestingly, Kapp didn't play his first NFL game until the age of 29, and he had his 7-touchdown game to remember at the age of 31. He only played 1 more season following this 7-touchdown performance before eventually retiring from the league. All right, now we're going to get into some more recent players. There was a long stretch of time before another player would reach that 7-touchdown mark in a single game, and despite being 37 years old in the 2013 season, Peyton Manning was still at the top of his game. He started off this season on a great note in the Broncos season opener against the Ravens. Baltimore was coming off a Super Bowl winning season. However, Manning gave them a huge wake-up call. While the Ravens kicked off this game with the only score of the first quarter on a 2-yard touchdown pass from Joe Flacco to Vontae Leach, Manning and the Broncos responded early in the second. Manning found Julius Thomas for a 24-yard touchdown, and while this was a very back-and-forth game throughout the first half, with the two teams swapping scores, heading into halftime, the Ravens were up 17-14. But Manning took over in the third quarter. First, he found Andre Caldwell for a 28-yard score before Wes Welker pulled in back-to-back touchdowns from 5 and 2 yards out. This run continued into the fourth quarter, where he hit Demaryius Thomas for a 26-yard touchdown. While the Ravens scored 10 unanswered points, Manning sealed the game with his 7th touchdown pass of that game, finding Demaryius Thomas once again, this time from 78 yards out. Denver took this game by a final score of 49-27, establishing establishing themselves as a real threat in the AFC. Manning threw for 462 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, an insane performance, especially for a 37-year-old. He continued to torch the league throughout the entirety of that season, throwing for 5,477 yards, 55 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, leading the league in both passing yards and passing touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl, on the All-Pro First Team, and he took home both the Offensive Player of the Year and MVP awards. Manning only ended up playing 2 more seasons following this historic performance. Oh, and by the way, if you didn't already know this, Manning still holds the record for most passing yards in a single season during that 2013 year, with that 5,477-yard performance. Now, this next player we're going to talk about, I know a lot of you hardcore football fans are going to know about this one. In week number 9, when the Eagles took on the Oakland Raiders in the 2013 season, Nick Foles threw for 7 touchdowns. Foles was only in his second year in the league, and this was only his 3rd start of the season. However, he absolutely cooked the Raiders on this day. He started off the game with a 2-yard find of Brent Selleck, and after a 24-yard field goal from Sebastian Janikowski to close out the first quarter, Foles and the Eagles found another gear in the passing game. He found Riley Cooper for back-to-back touchdown receptions, the first from 17 yards and the second from 63 yards. While the Raiders responded with a touchdown of their own, Foles quickly bounced back with a 15-yard dot to Zach Ertz. After another kick from Janikowski, the Eagles entered the locker room up 28-13, but they were not going to let up in the second half either. While the Raiders scored the final touchdown of that game late in the 4th, the game was already well over at this point, and the Eagles came out on top by a final score of 49-20. Seemingly out of nowhere, Nick Foles had the NFL world on the edge of their seats, throwing for 406 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. This game alone earned him the starting spot for Philly for the remainder of the season, and he finished the regular season with 2,891 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, leading the league with a 8.5% touchdown percentage. This earned him a spot in the Pro Bowl, which was the only appearance of his career, and later down the line, as many of you guys also will know, Nick Foles led the Eagles to a Super Bowl victory against none other than Tom Brady and the Patriots. The Philly special. We love Nick Foles around here. As an Eagles fan, gotta respect Nick Foles for bringing home the championship. Rounding out this list today, we're gonna jump to the 2015 season for a game between the Saints and the Giants in week number 8. Despite being 36 years old, Drew Brees could not be stopped through the air. Even though he was playing at a high level, the Saints were struggling to a 3-4 record, while the Giants were just 4-3. This was a duel between Brees and Eli Manning, with both veteran quarterbacks playing at a high level. Manning began the game with a 2-yard find to Odell Beckham Jr. However, Brees responded with 2 touchdown passes of his own to close out the first quarter. The first to Willie Snead for 34 yards, while the second was a 26-yard touchdown to Brandon Cooks. The second quarter played out in a very similar fashion, with Manning once again finding Odell Beckham Jr. in the red zone, then Brees responding with 2 touchdowns of his own. However, this time Manning closed out the quarter with another 2-yard touchdown to Shane Vereen. Sticking to their game plan, Odell scored the first touchdown on third, this time from 50 yards out, and then Brees threw for 2 more scores to end this quarter. Things shook out differently in the fourth, though. The Giants scored 3 unanswered touchdowns, Manning finding Dwayne Harris for 2 straight touchdowns, one from 9 yards out and the second from 20. Then Tremaine McBride picked off Brees and returned it for a 63-yard touchdown. Brees responded well by finding CJ Spiller for a 9-yard touchdown to tie the game at 49 all, with only 36 seconds left in the game. As time expired, Kai Forbath nailed a 50-yard field goal to win the game for New Orleans 52-49. While Manning ended the game with a loss, he still posted a very impressive 350 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. However, he was slightly one-upped by Drew Brees, both on the scoreboard and on the stat sheet, while he recorded an insane 505 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Brees finished that season with 4,870 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, leading the league in passing yards. Despite this, the Saints struggled to a 7-8 record with Brees as a starter, and he even failed to make the Pro Bowl that year. It's really surprising that the final 7-touchdown game came nearly a decade ago, with the immense amount of talent that we've seen at the quarterback position since Brees. Josh Allen has been the #1 quarterback 3 out of the past 4 years in fantasy football. His highlight reel is nothing short of spectacular.
Allen steps up, there's the shot, looking deep for Davis, touchdown! To the end zone, it's a touchdown catch. Allen steps up trying to run, he's got some room, Allen will take it in!
But how did a player this good have 6 other players drafted above him, and who were they? Today, we are going to find that out. Heading into the 2018 NFL Draft, many scouts didn't know exactly what to make out of Josh Allen. His college tape was, of course, extremely impressive, but at the same time, it had to be taken with a grain of salt because he attended a smaller school, Wyoming. This meant that the competition wasn't nearly what he would see at the NFL level, and even after the draft, he was regarded by many as one of, if not the biggest boom-bust players coming out of this class.
Buffalo Bills select Josh Allen.
Josh Allen is awful beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Even with the many question marks that were looming around Allen, the Bills still took the risk and picked him 7th overall. However, luckily for Buffalo's front office, he has developed into one of the best quarterbacks in the entire league. Now, it didn't appear that this was always going to be the case, though. In his rookie season, he threw more interceptions than touchdowns and failed to lead the Bills to a winning record as a starter.
2nd down 7. There you go. And it's incomplete. He's facing a 2nd down and 8 and looks into the nickel. Progressions, chased, Smith from behind.
Despite the rough starting season for him, it didn't take him long to adjust to playing against NFL caliber talent. Since then, he's been named to the Pro Bowl twice, the All-Pro second team once, and even finished top 5 in MVP voting in 3 of his 6 full seasons in the league so far. So far through the 2024 season, Allen has thrived and once again is proving himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the entire league. Thus far, he's thrown for 14 touchdowns and just 1 interception.
Trying to create, scanning the end zone, touchdown! Allen toward the end zone, caught! And now pitches downfield, in stride, Keon Coleman, and a touchdown for the rookie.
Which is a massive improvement from last year when he finished with 18 picks. Area of Allen's game that really sets him apart from the competition is his ability to get it done on the ground. He is a tough runner and he has already picked up 3 rushing touchdowns, and oftentimes, especially when he's in the zone, opposing defenses are forced to throw a spy on him, leaving one less man in coverage. While many believed he was bound to have a down year after the Bills moved on from Stephon Diggs over this past offseason, this has been far from the case, and if Allen is able to keep playing at this elite of a level, there is no doubt that he will once again be a finalist for the MVP at the season's end. Today, we're not going to be diving into Josh Allen's career though. Instead, we're going to be taking a look at the 6 players drafted in front of him, seeing how their careers have played out thus far in comparisons to Allen's, determining who has had the better career up to this point in time, and if the team drafting him at that certain spot made a massive mistake not taking a risk on the quarterback from Wyoming instead. With the first overall pick of the 2018 NFL Draft, the Cleveland Browns selected quarterback Baker Mayfield out of Oklahoma. While in retrospect, there were at least 2 quarterbacks that likely would have fared better in Cleveland in this class with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. At the time, this was looked at as the smart pick for the Browns. Heading into the draft, scouts deemed him as a year 1 starter, and NFL.com ranked him as the top quarterback in the entire draft class. He was a Heisman Trophy winner, and no one else in college football was playing at the level that Mayfield was. Despite being slightly undersized, scouts had no worries that this would have any effect on Mayfield, and he was drawing comparisons to players such as Doug Flutie, Brett Favre, and even Drew Brees. Even with all the hype surrounding him heading into his rookie season, it was clear that he wasn't coming into an ideal situation. The Browns had only won 1 game in the past 2 seasons, and were coming off a year in which they became the 2nd team in NFL history to go 0-16. Baker was immediately tasked with taking one of the worst teams in the history of the league and completely turning the franchise around. It appeared that Cleveland had found their guy though in Mayfield's rookie season. Following Tyrod Taylor suffering a concussion in week number 3, Mayfield made his NFL debut. While he didn't really fill up the stat sheet by any means, this was still a good performance, especially for it being his first time on an NFL field. While he was unable to find the end zone, he still threw for 201 yards while completing 73.9% of his pass attempts.
Flag on the play, pass is caught by Landry. Here's one, it is caught by
The cherry on top was that Mayfield led the Browns to their first win in over a season. After a debut like this, paired with Taylor still being sidelined due to a minor back injury, there was no doubt that the starting position was Baker's to lose for the time being. He continued to turn heads in his rookie season and went on to come in second place in Offensive Rookie of the Year voting, only behind Saquon Barkley. After adding Odell Beckham Jr. over the offseason, Cleveland entered the season as possible playoff contenders. However, Mayfield went through a regression. He only threw more touchdowns than interceptions in 5 out of the 16 games that he played in, and he finished the season throwing 22 touchdowns.
First time Baker Mayfield trying to go to the air, and he wants a lot. He's going for the end zone. On first down, Mayfield down the middle. Beckham has it.
To his 21 interceptions.
Try and get the ball downfield.
And this one is intercepted by Darius Phillips.
Along with this, he posted a career-low 59.4% completion percentage. Despite taking this step back from his rookie season, the Browns still finished the year with a 6-10 record. Could have been worse. Now, in the 2020 season, he was just short of leading the Browns to an appearance in the AFC Championship. However, just 1 year later, the team was already ready to move on from him as they went back to missing the playoffs yet again. They eventually did so, trading him to the Panthers for a conditional 2024 pick.
The number 1 overall pick in the 2018 draft is packing his bags, and he is headed to the Carolina Panthers. Now, this comes as Baker Mayfield has made it pretty clear he did not want to stay in Cleveland.
Things went from bad to worse for Mayfield with the Panthers, and after not even a full season with the team, they released him. But right when Baker hit rock bottom, he rose from the ashes. Following an injury to Matthew Stafford, he was given one last shot at being a starting quarterback with the Los Angeles Rams. While LA was already eliminated from playoff contention, Baker still had a ton to play for, and he showed out. This late season performance with the Rams earned him a chance to compete for the starting job with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers following the departure of Tom Brady. Mayfield not only won that quarterback battle, he's also ensured that the Bucs did not miss a beat even after the retirement of the greatest quarterback of all time. Last season, he led them to the divisional round of the playoffs and even made a Pro Bowl appearance. In this current 2024 season, he was on pace to have another huge year through the air, but some recent injuries to his top 2 wide receivers, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, might give him some problems in that department. While many have had their doubts about Baker following his time with the Browns and the Panthers, he has completely revived his career in Tampa Bay and will likely be their franchise quarterback for years to come. Despite this, I think it's pretty clear that Allen is the better player in this situation, and when taking into account how things have played out in Cleveland, there's a strong chance that they would have been better off taking the quarterback from Wyoming with the first overall pick. There's always going to be the argument, though, that if Cleveland took Josh Allen, then he would have just stunk it up due to the organization's past turnout, so this one's really up for debate. With the second overall pick, the New York Giants selected Saquon Barkley, running back out of Penn State. Heading into the draft, Barkley was a no-brainer as the top running back prospect in the entire class. NFL.com deemed him a perennial All-Pro and rated him a 7.45 out of 8. Scouts around the league were comparing him to former legends like Barry Sanders, and it was expected that he would become an all-time great. The Giants didn't hesitate at all to add him to an offense that already featured weapons such as Eli Manning and Odell Beckham Jr. He had absolutely no issues making the transition to the NFL either, and in only his rookie season, Barkley was already performing as one of the most talented running backs in the entire league.
Now Barkley up the middle, cuts to the outside. Saquon Barkley across midfield. Stayed in bounds, and Barkley. Here's Barkley off the hesitation. Inside the 5, still going. Touchdown, Saquon Barkley.
His extremely versatile game, along with his damage that he could do in the passing game, made him one of the toughest players at the position to bring down. He earned the Offensive Rookie of the Year award and even made the Pro Bowl in the 2018 season. However, the following season, the main thing that has really held Barkley back in his career so far have been the injuries. He started to deal with that in 2019, where he suffered a sprained ankle. The year after, he was only able to play in 2 games because of a torn ACL. When he finally made his return in the 2021 season, he looked far from the same back that he was in his rookie year. He averaged a very rough 3.7 yards per carry compared to the 5 average that he had in his first year. However, This drop-off was to be expected. An ACL tear is one of the toughest injuries for a running back to bounce back from, and the Giants' offensive line was bottom 5 in the league, which certainly didn't help his case. Heading into the 2022 season, many people had already counted Barkley out and thought that his best years were behind him, but he had a complete return to form. He had his first 1,000-yard season in 3 years and even made a return to the Pro Bowl. Despite his strong showing in 2022 that earned him 3rd place in Comeback Player of the Year voting, he once again took a step back the following season. But this cannot be completely blamed on Barkley. The Giants had a horrendous quarterback rotation that allowed defenses to hedge very heavily against the run, and once again, the Giants had a bottom 5 offensive line to block for him, making it very difficult to get anything going. It was clear that his time in New York was coming to an end, or else the rest of his career would be wasted. And in the following offseason, he signed with the Eagles. Thus far, he is well on pace to having his best season of his entire career with the Eagles.
Barkley has it in a crowd. They're going to push, and he is in for a touchdown.
Looking the other way. Lofts it. Barkley, end zone.
If he's able to continue this level of play, there is no doubt that he's going to be contending for an Offensive Player of the Year award come season's end. That's what happens when you actually have a good offensive line blocking for you. While Allen has had much more of an impactful career up to this point, it's very hard to compare the two since they obviously play different positions, and the Giants weren't in search of a quarterback at the time. Eli Manning did enter the 2018 season coming off a 3-12 year, and at 37 years old, the Giants probably should have been looking at drafting another franchise caliber quarterback. I do understand them not taking Allen at number 2 though, because New York thought they could squeeze a couple more years out of Eli. While Barkley's time with the Giants was riddled with injuries, he was still one of the best running backs in franchise history, so I can't fault New York for taking him. With the 3rd overall pick, the 2nd quarterback was taken off the board here when the New York Jets selected Sam Darnold out of USC.
With the 3rd pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the New York Jets select Sam Darnold, quarterback, USC.
NFL.com deemed Darnold to be a Pro Bowl talent, and scouts were very high on him, comparing him to Andrew Luck. Similar to Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, Darnold had a tall task in front of him, attempting to pull the Jets out of poverty. He had a roller coaster of a rookie season, but this is to be expected from any quarterback in that type of situation. While he did have his fair share of low points, some future Hall of Fame quarterbacks had downright awful rookie campaigns as well. Along with this, Darnold also had a fair share of moments in which he looked like he had what it took to be the future of the Jets. He had one of the best seasons of his career in 2019, where he threw for 3,024 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. However, even with this respectable stat line, this season had its fair share of low points, most notably in a game against the New England Patriots on Monday Night Football. Darnold was unfortunately the victim of a hot mic that picked him up saying that he was seeing ghosts out there.
Seeing ghosts.
Referring to sensing that he was about to be hit in the pocket when in fact nobody was there. This, paired with the fact that he missed some time earlier in the season with mono, made him the butt of almost every joke that year. To make things even worse in the Patriots game, the Jets were stomped by a final score of 33-0, and Darnold only threw for 86 yards. Along with that, he threw 4 interceptions and was only able to complete 34.4% of his passes.
Picked off again.
Despite leading the Jets to a 7-6 record that season as a starter, things were about to get so much worse for him in New York. In his final season with the team, they suffered to a 2-10 record with him starting, and he only threw 9 touchdowns to his 11 interceptions. At this point, the Jets had seen enough from him, and they chose to move on from him just 3 years after using the 3rd overall pick. He was traded to the Carolina Panthers for a 2021 6th-round pick, along with a 2nd and a 4th-round pick in the 2022 draft.
Sam Darnold is now headed to the Carolina Panthers. The two teams have agreed to terms.
Many believe that a change of scenery was exactly what Darnold needed to live up to the potential that got him drafted with the 3rd overall pick. However, in his first year with the team, he made it hard for even his biggest supporters to continue defending him. Once again, he threw more interceptions than touchdowns, this time 13 picks to his 9 touchdowns. After the Panthers traded for Baker Mayfield the following offseason, Darnold started the year off as a backup. But following Mayfield's release, he once again took over that starting role, This time around, he looked much better, leading the team to a 4-2 record while throwing for 1,143 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Despite this being his best showing in the past 3 years, he was unable to find a team that would bring him in as a starting quarterback and elected to sign with the 49ers as a backup to Brock Purdy.
Hey Niners faithful, it's Sam Darnold. So happy to be here, happy to be in the Bay, and just excited to get to work.
It appeared that this is exactly what Darnold needed. Being able to get reps in with truly elite weapons and not have the weight of carrying a struggling franchise made him play much better and more relaxed. Following a year with the 49ers, he signed with the Vikings, which put him in line to be a starter once again. Following a preseason injury to rookie quarterback J.J. McCarthy, Darnold was in full control this time around of that starting spot. With how he's been playing recently, it's going to be very difficult to bench him when McCarthy is fully recovered. Darnold has shocked the league, and through 7 games, he's put up 1,610 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. If he keeps this level of play up, it will definitely be one of his best years as a professional. Despite his unexpected resurgence, Allen has had a much better career, and if the Jets could redo this draft, I'm sure they would have picked him without a second thought. With the 4th overall pick, the Cleveland Browns were up once again. This time they selected Denzel Ward, who was a cornerback out of Ohio State.
With the 4th pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the Cleveland Browns select Denzel Ward, defensive back, Ohio State.
Leading up to the draft, scouts were very high on Ward, with NFL.com deeming him as a year 1 starter and ranking him as the best corner in the entire draft. He was frequently being compared to Chris Harris Jr., who at the time was dominating the league. Ward got his career off to a hot start, picking off 3 passes and making an appearance in the Pro Bowl during his first season. He really couldn't ask much more out of a rookie. As his career continued to progress, he quickly earned a spot as one of the most highly regarded corners in the entire league. He picked off 2 passes both in 2019 and 2020, but in the following season, he made a return to the Pro Bowl with another 3 interception effort. His biggest play for the season came when he made the second pick 6 of his career, which ended up being returned for 99 yards. In 2022, while he did fail to make a return to the Pro Bowl, he once again picked off 3 passes and interestingly led the league with 2 fumbles returned for a touchdown. He made his 3rd and most recent Pro Bowl appearance in 2023 as the head honcho of the secondary on a very scary Browns defense. Thus far throughout the 2024 season, he leads the league with 12 pass deflections, and if he's able to remain healthy, it's likely that he's well on his way to another Pro Bowl appearance. Throughout his career so far, Ward has been tasked with covering the best wide receivers in the league, and he has more than held his own against them. Both Allen and Ward are 2 of the top talents at their respective positions. Had Cleveland not picked Mayfield with that 1st overall pick, this would have been an ideal spot to snag Allen. However, assuming they already picked Baker, you're not going to select another quarterback, of course, so Ward was the right choice. With the 5th overall pick, the Denver Broncos selected edge rusher Bradley Chubb out of North Carolina State.
With the 5th pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Bradley Chubb, defensive end, NC State.
He was deemed a prospect who was bound to become a perennial All-Pro coming into the draft, and he was ranked as the best defensive end the class had to offer. Some scouts were even comparing him to Terrell Suggs, which could only mean great things. Pairing Chubb with Von Miller was set to give Denver one of the scariest pass rushes in the entire league, and one that no opposing quarterback wanted to go up against. He had a very strong rookie season, racking up a wild 12 sacks, earning 3rd place in the Defensive Rookie of the Year voting. Unfortunately, he was only able to play in 4 games the following year after suffering a torn ACL. Despite this debilitating injury, he was able to put together an incredible bounce-back season in 2020, earning his first Pro Bowl selection on the back of a 7.5 sack season. However, injuries once again kept him sidelined for a majority of the following year, this time 10 games due to an ankle injury. Despite being forced to go through another recovery process and spend the 2022 campaign playing for 2 different teams, Chubb made a return to the Pro Bowl. He's a player who can thrive in any system, and he proved that this season, picking up with the Miami Dolphins right where he left off with the Broncos. 2023 marked his first full season in Miami, Miami, and he had arguably the best season of his career, recording 11 sacks along with a league-leading 6 forced fumbles. But just when things started to go right again for Chubb, he suffered another torn ACL that has left him unable to suit up yet in this current 2024 season. Hopefully he can get back to reaching his full potential sooner rather than later, because he has had some terrible luck. As for the debate if the Broncos should have taken Allen has had a better career up to this point in time, but this is not to take anything away from Chubb. Despite all the injuries that he's suffered already, he's continued to show his resiliency and proven time and time again as one of the league's most dangerous edge rushers. However, with the Broncos rolling out Case Keenum as their quarterback in 2018, along with the awful run of quarterbacks they've had since Peyton Manning, having a player like Allen could have really turned things around for this franchise. The final pick before Allen was Quentin Nelson, an offensive guard out of Notre Dame who the Indianapolis Colts scooped up with the 6th overall selection.
With the 6th pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the Indianapolis Colts select Quentin Nelson.
NFL.com deemed him as someone who would turn into an all-pro at his position, and they did not have to wait long for this prediction to come true. It was a poorly kept secret that Nelson was an incredible talent, with scouts comparing him to Larry Allen before he had even taken one NFL snap. Thus far throughout his career, Nelson has likely the most accolades to his name out of anyone in the entire draft class, outside of Lamar Jackson with 2 MVPs. Nelson has quickly proven himself as arguably the best left guard the entire league has to offer, and he has yet to miss the Pro Bowl in the first 6 years of his career. Along with this, he has been named to the All-Pro first team 3 times and the All-Pro second team once. With the team expecting Andrew Luck to continue to be their starting quarterback for years to come, this was the perfect pick for the Colts. You really couldn't have asked for a better lineman, and he has continued to prove himself as one of, if not the most talented at the position year in and year out. It can be argued that Nelson has had a better career at this point thus far than Allen has, and with Luck already being an elite starting quarterback for the Colts at the time, it really wouldn't have made much sense for them to take Allen. It's week 14 of the 2022 NFL season. The Rams are down 16-10, pinned on their own 2-yard line with only a minute 45 left in the game. In the grand scheme of things, this is a meaningless game in a lost season for the Rams. Coming off their 2021-22 Super Bowl title, their veteran-led roster didn't even look the same due to all the injuries, leaving stars like Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, and starting quarterback Matthew Stafford sidelined. Missing their most important players led to the Rams slipping to just 3-9 heading into this matchup against the Raiders. And while LA fans were simply ready for this season to just be over with, this contest was the difference between life and death for the career of Baker Mayfield. After his fall from grace that saw him suit up for 2 teams in 2 seasons, Mayfield was given one final chance to prove himself as this starting caliber quarterback that many had no doubt that he could become once he entered the league. Following the injury to Stafford and poor performances from Bryce Perkins and John Wolford, the Rams had no choice but to pick up Mayfield. The only problem was that this would be a brand new playbook for him to learn in just 2 days, which is nearly impossible. LA dumbed it down as much as they could and just saw what happened. The final drive almost stopped dead in its tracks on 3rd down, when Mayfield threw an interception to Duron Harmon. But luckily, following a defensive pass interference penalty from Amik Robertson, the pick was not only called back, but the Rams were also given a 1st down.
Pass interference, defense number 21, replaces the spot of the foul, automatic, first down.
Following a 9-yard sack on the next play, it appeared that the Rams were not going to be able to move the ball at all or get anything going on their last chance to win the game. However, they were bailed out yet again by a stupid unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on Jerry Tillery, where he knocked the ball out of Mayfield's hand to try to waste more clock. Despite the ball being on their own 28-yard line with only a minute 20 left in the game, Mayfield caught fire. He found Ben Skoranek for a 32-yard gain.
More light deep down the sideline, and it is caught.
And then Malcolm Brown for 9 yards before hitting Skoranek yet again for another 8 yards.
Mayfield throws, that's caught, that's a 1st down. Here's Skoranek.
With just 16 seconds remaining on the game clock, Baker was forced to spike the ball to stop the clock. And the next throw is the one that would essentially save Baker's career.
2nd and 10, Mayfield to the end zone to Jefferson. Is that possible? Touchdown.
In this brief 2024 season, Baker is lighting it up so far and making defenders look silly in the process. But how does a guy who lost his job multiple times make this insane of a comeback? Baker Reagan Mayfield was born on April 14, 1995 in Austin, Texas. His name came as a compromise between his parents. His mom was dead set on his name being Baker, while his dad would only agree to the idea. He was also named after former President Ronald Reagan. His father James worked at a private equity firm, and during Baker's youth, the family fell on some tough financial times, forcing them to move out of their home and live in rentals for the latter part of his childhood. Despite the hardships that his childhood brought, Mayfield fell in love with football and could not get enough of the game even from an early age. He grew up as a fan of the Oklahoma Sooners despite being from Texas. Baker went on to attend Lake Travis High School in Austin, and there he proved himself as one of the most promising prospects in the entire country. But this didn't happen overnight. Mayfield did not make it onto the varsity team as a quarterback until his junior year. In his first year as the team's starting quarterback, he led the team to a Division IV state championship. When taking into account just how seriously high school football is taken in Texas and the talent that comes from that state, this was a very impressive feat. Mayfield was only able to play in 11 games his senior year, compared to the 16 that he took the field in during the previous season. As a result of this, he took a bit of a statistical dip. When his high school career came to an end, he had thrown for 6,255 yards, 67 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, while picking up an additional 1,035 yards and 13 touchdowns on the ground in only 2 seasons. Along with this, he led Lake Travis to a combined 25-2 record. Despite his very impressive 2-year run as a starting QB, Baker flew a bit under the radar when it came to college scouts. ESPN gave him a 3-star rating while deeming him the 69th best quarterback in the 2013 recruiting class. He received offers from some Division I programs, but it was nothing compared to his childhood dreams of playing for Oklahoma. Mayfield received offers from Florida Atlantic, New Mexico, Rice, and Washington State. However, he shockingly chose not to attend any of them. He later went on to say that he could have easily gone to Florida Atlantic, but his father pushed him to attend a bigger school, thinking that it would be an easier path for NFL scouts, get more eyes on him, and Baker would have the chance to make it to the league. As a result of this, he wound up walking on at Texas Tech. Even though he was a walk-on at Texas Tech, it didn't take him long at all to wow the coaching staff, and he made history as the first walk-on freshman to start in a Week 1 matchup. He proved the coach's gutsy decision right in his first ever start. While they were taking on a much inferior Southern Methodist team, Mayfield took care of business, throwing for 413 yards and 4 touchdowns on an insane 60 pass attempts. Along with this, he picked up an additional 16 yards and a score on the ground. After leading Texas Tech to a 5-0 record in his first 5 starts, things got a little tougher for Mayfield, suffering a knee injury that kept him sidelined for the next 4 weeks. The Red Raiders got off to a slow start in Mayfield's return to the field, losing 3 straight games to Big 12 opponents Kansas State, Baylor, and Texas. During this 3-game losing skid, Texas Tech was outscored by a combined 153-76. It was clear that Mayfield was still a bit shaken up from his knee injury and was playing well below the standards that he set for himself during the first half of the season. He failed to throw for a touchdown in 2 of these 3 matchups and also only threw 4 touchdowns to his 4 interceptions. Despite his freshman year ending on a bit of a sour note, this was still an insanely impressive campaign for Baker. It's rare that a walk-on ever sees the field in their freshman season, let alone becoming a starter in week number 1 and performing at the level that Mayfield did. While he was only able to suit up in 8 games, he still recorded 2,315 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions through the air, and 190 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Following this impressive freshman season, Mayfield made the decision to live out his childhood dreams and play for Oklahoma. However, college football was set up much differently in 2014 than it is now. As a result of the transfer, Baker was forced to sit out an entire year, leading to him missing all of the 2014 season. Despite this, after spending an entire year watching from the sidelines, he was more than ready to prove himself once again when his name was called to take the the reins at quarterback in 2015. Similar to his start at Texas Tech, Mayfield showed out in his debut at Oklahoma against a much worse opponent, this time the Akron Zips. He finished the contest with 388 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air with a rushing score. He rattled off 4 wins in his first 4 games as a Sooner, but his first loss came in the Red River rivalry against Texas. This was the only loss that the Sooners would take in the regular season. Outside of their game against Texas, Baker tormented Big 12 defenses, including a revenge game against his former team where he threw for 212 yards and 2 touchdowns and leading Oklahoma to a 63-27 blowout win. After winning the Big 12 and finishing the regular season with an 11-1 record, the Sooners earned the 4th seed in the college football playoff. They were forced to match up against top-seeded Clemson in the first round of the playoffs, taking them on in the Orange Bowl. This was a matchup between 2 future starting NFL quarterbacks, with Deshaun Watson starting for Clemson. Mayfield and the Sooners were outmatched in this one and fell by a final score of 37-17. While this was another season for Baker that ended on a sour note, he once again made history, leading Oklahoma to their first ever playoff berth. He finished the year throwing for 3,700 yards, 36 touchdowns, and only 7 interceptions, while completing 68.1% of his pass attempts, leading the Big 12 in both passing touchdowns and completion percentage. This earned him the title of Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. Following this incredible debut at Oklahoma, the 2016 season did not get off on the right foot at all. They were ranked as the 3rd best team in all of college football and took on a very talented 15th seeded Houston in the opening game. Shockingly, the Sooners fell by a final score of 33-23, which dropped them all the way down to 14th the following week. While they were able to rebound against Louisiana Monroe, they fell once again in week number 3, this time to Ohio State in devastating fashion. With 2 losses to their name just 3 weeks into the season, it was clear that the Sooners' hopes to return to the playoffs for a 2nd consecutive year had come and gone. However, this loss to Ohio State was the final time that Oklahoma was defeated the entire year. Mayfield was able to finally get his first career win against Texas. He was also on the winning side of one of the greatest duels between 2 quarterbacks in college football history. This matchup took place when Mayfield made a return to Jones AT&T Stadium, where he took on Texas Tech. This was far from as easy of a win as it was the year prior, and this mainly came as a result of the Red Raiders' new quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. This game was an absolute shootout, but Baker and the Sooners came out on top by a final score of 66-59. Baker finished the contest with 545 yards and 7 touchdowns through the air on only 36 passing attempts. In comparison, Mahomes threw for 734 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception on 88 pass attempts. This is one of the highest scoring games in NCAA history, and once again proved Mayfield as one of the most talented quarterbacks that college football had to offer. Oklahoma's season ended with a 35-19 win over Auburn in the Sugar Bowl. Mayfield once again finished the year with a very impressive stat line, throwing for 3,965 yards, 40 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions while completing 70.9% of his passes. This completion percentage went on to be the best in all of college football in that 2016 season. After having their playoff hopes squashed so early in the 2016 season, Mayfield and the Sooners were on a revenge tour in 2017. After a dominant win in Week 1 against UTEP, they took on the 2nd-ranked Ohio State team on the road. Despite losing by 21 points just a year prior, the Sooners were able to flip the script, taking this game by a final score of 31-16. Mayfield torched a very talented Buckeye defense that included players like Denzel Ward and Nick Bosa for 386 yards and 3 touchdowns. After the game, Mayfield took a team flag from the cheerleaders and planted it firmly in the middle of Ohio State's logo at the 50-yard line. This is still one of the most disrespectful moments in college football history. Just 2 games following their elite showing against Ohio State, Oklahoma was stunned at home in a game against Iowa State, which they fell by a final score of 38-31. After this loss, they fell to 12th in the top 25 rankings, and it was clear that they would have to win out to have any chance of making the playoffs. Towards the tail end of the regular season, Mayfield had a moment of disrespect that might have even topped his flag plant against Ohio State. This game came against Kansas. Before the game, Jayhawks players refused to shake Mayfield or his teammates' hand. It was clear that he took this to heart, not only that he was disrespected, but also his teammates. This lit a fire in him, and he spent the rest of the game doing everything in his power to demoralize the Jayhawks. Things came to a boiling point when a Kansas corner took a cheap shot on him after Mayfield threw a pass. Following a 3-yard touchdown pass to Mark Andrews, he was seen taunting them and grabbing his crotch in a moment of total disrespect. While the announcers brought up the point that this was something that NFL GMs did not want to see, it was a clear display of Mayfield's passion for the game at the very least. The fire that was lit inside of him during the pregame coin toss continued to grow throughout the game and led to him putting on a performance to remember, throwing for 257 yards and 3 touchdowns. Oklahoma finished the season with an 11-1 record and took down TCU in the Big 12 championship 41-17. This secured them a second trip to the playoffs, this time taking on a 3rd-seeded Georgia. In his final college game ever, Mayfield was narrowly defeated by a final score of 54-48, but he put on an incredible send-off performance, throwing for 287 yards and 2 touchdowns against an elite Bulldogs defense. In his senior season, Baker racked up 4,627 yards, 43 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions while completing 70.5% of his passes. He once again led the Big 12 in passing touchdowns and the entire NCAA in completion percentage. This earned him another Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year award, a unanimous All-American selection, and a Heisman Trophy. Heading into the draft, scouts were extremely high on Mayfield. NFL.com ranked him as the best quarterback in the entire draft. He was drawing comparisons to former greats like Brett Favre, Drew Brees, and even Doug Flutie. The Cleveland Browns did not hesitate at all to take him with the 1st overall pick, in hopes that he would finally be the one to fill the role of a franchise quarterback. Now, being the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns is a position that countless players have tried to hold on to, but no one particularly has thrived in it. However, early on, Mayfield looked like he could end up developing into that guy. He was coming into an awful situation with Cleveland going 0-16 for only the 2nd time in NFL history. If anybody was going to be able to pull them out of this hole, it was going to be a player like Baker, someone who had been an underdog and doubted at almost every level of football that he played in since being a walk-on at Texas Tech. He saw action for the first time in Week 3 against the New York Jets after Tyrod Taylor went down with an injury. While he was unable to find the end zone in this game, Mayfield had a great debut, throwing for 201 yards while completing 73.9% of his passes. Best of all, he led the Browns to their first win in over a year. He was given the keys to the franchise for the remainder of the season and took over the starting role. It was clear that even with Mayfield playing at a high level, the Browns were not going to become a playoff contender overnight. But there was flashes where it looked like Mayfield was going to have a very promising future in Cleveland. The strongest showing from his rookie year came in Week 12 when the Browns took on the Bengals. After putting on a 3-touchdown performance while only throwing 3 incompletions against the Falcons, Baker followed that up with a 258-yard, 4-touchdown game in a 35-20 win over Cincinnati.
Mayfield
to sit back there and spit it.
Here he goes to the end zone. Caught! Mayfield. Njoku tries to leap, and he does right into the grass, but they push him in! Touchdown!
By the time the regular season came to an end, Baker had thrown for 3,725 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions with a completion percentage of 63.8. Along with this, he led Cleveland to a 7-7 record in the 14 games that he played in. He was in the running for Offensive Rookie of the Year, but was beaten by New York Giants running back Saquon Barkley. After a very promising rookie season, Baker took a bit of a step back in the 2019 season. Heading into the year, some looked at the Browns as Super Bowl hopefuls with the addition of Odell Beckham Jr. in the offseason, but he was beginning to show the downsides that came with playing his gunslinger style of football. The season got off to an awful start in which he threw 3 interceptions in a 43-13 pounding by the Titans. This was a trend of things to come, as Mayfield was only able to throw for more touchdowns than interceptions in just 6 of the 16 games that he played in. This was arguably the worst season of his entire NFL career, and many began to doubt his abilities to truly be the savior at quarterback that the Browns needed. By the time this year came to an end, he had thrown for 22 touchdowns to his 21 interceptions, while also posting a career-low 59.4% completion percentage. Despite his shortcomings this season, the Browns still posted a record of 6-10. Now, the roller coaster of Baker's time in Cleveland continued in the 2020 season. He played more like like his rookie self rather than the version of himself the year prior. Throughout the entire season, Mayfield's passes were coming off his hand more accurately, and his decision-making had greatly improved from the year prior. He had the Browns playing at an extremely high level and led them to an 11-5 record. This earned the team their first playoff appearance in 18 years. The wild card round, they took on a much more playoff season Pittsburgh Steelers team. Baker put on a show, throwing for 263 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions in a dominant 48-37 showing.
Mayfield, quick throw, caught over the middle by Landry. Jarvis Landry inside the 10, and Jarvis.
In the divisional round, they took on the Kansas City Chiefs, and while they appeared to be heavily outmatched coming into the game, Mayfield was able to keep them competitive, and it even looked like they might have a chance to win late in the game. However, when the final whistle sounded, the Chiefs held a 22-17 lead, and Cleveland's Cinderella run was finally put to an end. The 2021 season was a bit of a letdown, both for Baker and the Browns. He suffered a partially torn labrum in the team's Week 2 matchup against the Houston Texans. While he powered through and played in 14 games that season, he was forced to change his throwing motion, and it clearly had an effect on his passing ability. Despite his shoddy performance throughout the regular season, this gesture of continuing to play for his teammates, even through a nagging injury, once again put on the display of Baker Mayfield's dedication to his teammates and the game. His time with the Browns finally came to an end after this season, and even when he was no longer on the team, countless Cleveland teammates came out to speak highly of Baker's character and how he was a great locker room guy. But the Browns had their sights set on Deshaun Watson and consequently traded Mayfield to the Carolina Panthers for a conditional 2024 draft pick. This was not an ideal situation for Mayfield, but he won the starting spot for the Panthers heading into the 2022 season and did have a chance at another revenge game taking on the Browns in week number 1. While he did have a solid game throwing for 235 yards and a touchdown, they came up just short of getting the win, losing by a final score of 26-24. He started the following 4 games and was only able to pull out 1 win. His 1 touchdown to 3 picks in his final 2 games led to him getting benched for the next 5 weeks. In the final game that he played for the Panthers, he had a 0 touchdown, 2 interception showing before once again being benched. 2 weeks following this, the Panthers announced that they were going to release Baker Mayfield. Now, after not being able to hold on to the starting spot on one of the worst teams in the league, many began to wonder if Baker's career was doomed. It didn't take long for him to find a new home though with the Los Angeles Rams, and this takes us back to where we started this video off with his masterful 2-minute drill that gave them the win over the Las Vegas Raiders. This heroic game-winning touchdown pass won him the starting job in LA for the remainder of the season. While the Rams had no hopes of making the playoffs, even if Baker played completely perfect football, it did give him a chance to prove the coaching staffs around the league that he was more than capable of being a starting quarterback in the NFL. His best game with the Rams came in week 16 when they took on the Broncos. Mayfield had a great day through the air, throwing for 230 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. LA also won in dominant fashion by a final score of 51-14. In the offseason, the Tampa Bay Bucks signed Baker to a 1-year deal to prove his worth. This was the perfect situation for him. However, he was forced to follow up Tom Brady, who had spent the previous 3 seasons as the team's starting QB. It was not going to be easy. Mayfield's back was against the wall yet again. His contract was set up to where if he did not perform well, the Bucks would not have to sign him back, and he would likely never get another chance to be a week 1 starter in the NFL. But like many times in his career, when his back was against the wall, he rose to the occasion and performed at his best ability. He had the best season of his career in 2023, setting career highs in passing yards with 4,044, passing touchdowns with 28, and a completion percentage of 64.3%. Along with this, he led Tampa Bay to a 9-8 record, earning them a spot in the playoffs. For the first time in his career, Baker was a Pro Bowler and had a chance to make an underdog run in the playoffs. In the first round, they took on a very good Philadelphia Eagles team who were dominant on both sides of the ball in the regular season. Let's say halfway up to the regular season, then their defense really began to fall off. But regardless, Baker not only led the Bucks to an upset, he completely dismantled the Eagles defense, throwing for 337 yards and 3 touchdowns in a 32-9 win. In the divisional round, they played another elite team in the Detroit Lions. While Tampa Bay did fall a little bit short by a final score of 31-23, Baker still had a very good performance, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns on the day. Now, early in this 2024 season, Baker has been one of the best performers at the quarterback position. While only time will tell if he's able to keep up this pace, if he is, this is going to be another career year from a player who was on the fritz of not being signed to a roster just a couple of years prior. It's pretty clear to me that Baker has proven himself as a more than capable starting quarterback in Tampa Bay, and it's crazy to think that if he didn't have that game-winning touchdown pass against the Raiders, there's a strong chance that none of what has happened in Tampa Bay would have been possible.
Mayfield gonna run again. Baker up the middle, inside the 5. Mayfield lunging, touchdown! What an answer!
Coming out of college, Sam Darnold was one of the most highly sought-after players in the entire 2018 NFL Draft. He was selected over players like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Fred Warner, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, and while that might seem silly now, nobody knew what was in store back then. Now, despite all the hype he had coming into the league, he almost played himself out a little over 5 seasons into his NFL career. But you wouldn't know it by watching him on the Vikings in this current 2024 season. I mean, he looks like a completely different player than we have ever seen in the past.
Darnold looks, throws it, caught. Darnold again with time, into the end zone, caught, touchdown.
I would have thought all you were crazy if you would have told me that we're going to be making a video covering the revival of Sam Darnold in the 2024 season, but here we are. Sam Darnold was born on June 5th, 1997 in Dana Point, California to Chris and Michael Darnold. Both his parents were extremely talented athletes, with his father playing offensive lineman at the University of Redlands, while his mom was a volleyball player at Long Beach City College. Growing up, Sam was encouraged to pursue any sport that he so desired. For some time, it actually appeared that his true calling was going to be basketball. After dropping baseball following his freshman year at San Clemente High School, he focused on basketball and football. On the basketball court, he was named the South Coast League's most valuable player 2 times, averaging 14.8 points, 9.1 rebounds, 3.2 assists, and 2.3 steals per game those seasons. His high school basketball coach saw something very special in him and believed that he was capable of playing basketball for a Pac-12 school. Along with this, there were some very distinct skills that clearly carried over from the football field for Darnold. Most notably, the ability to throw full court passes more accurately than any player that he'd ever coached before. Interestingly, Darnold began his high school football career playing on both sides of the ball, wide receiver on offense and linebacker on defense. But he got an opportunity that went on to change his life in his sophomore year. After San Clemente's starting quarterback went down with an injury, Darnold took over the starting spot and never looked back. After a promising sophomore season, he suffered a foot injury that kept him sidelined for the majority of his junior year. Despite this, he came back better than ever in his senior season, leading the team to the CIF Southern Section Southwest Division Championship game. While his team came up just short, this in part was due to Darnold being forced to leave the game early with a concussion. While his high school career ended on a sad note, Darnold still posted very impressive stats in his senior season, throwing for 2,985 yards and 39 touchdowns, while also picking up an additional 785 yards and 13 touchdowns on the ground. After an elite senior season, Darnold was one of the most sought-after recruits in the entire class of 2015. ESPN gave him a 4-star rating, along with ranking him as the 8th best quarterback in the class, along with being the 115th best recruit overall. As a result of this, he was receiving attention from big schools. He received offers from Oregon, Tennessee, Utah, and USC. He ultimately decided to remain in his home state of California and become a USC Trojan. Interestingly, despite being a 4-star recruit at quarterback, USC defensive coordinator Justin Wilcox did everything in his power to get Darnold to switch over to the linebacker position. This was the position that he started his high school career at, but Darnold knew the talent that he possessed at quarterback and decided to prove himself. USC had a loaded QB room at the time, led by future 3rd-round pick Cody Kessler. As a result of this, Darnold wound up being redshirted in what would have been his freshman season. Even after sacrificing a year due to being redshirted, he still had to wait even longer before getting a chance to start at quarterback for his dream school. In the 2016 season, Max Brown began the season as the team's starter. Fortunately for Darnold, though, this ended up being a failed experiment, with Brown leading the team to a measly 1-2 record in the first 3 games of the season. In his debut as the team's starter, the Trojans faced off against a Utah team that was ranked 24th in the country. Now, he didn't blow away anybody in this matchup, but for a debut, it was not a bad performance by any means. He threw for 253 yards while picking up an additional 41 yards and a touchdown on the ground. USC came up just a bit short of a win, barely falling by a final score of 31-27. But this loss, in what would have been a storybook debut for the hometown kid, lit a fire under him, and he looked like an extremely different player through the remainder of the season. He refused to be defeated again, and the Trojans did not lose another game for the remainder of the 2016 season. To pull this off, they were forced to take down 21st ranked Colorado, 4th ranked Washington, and 5th ranked Penn State. This win over Washington was arguably the most impressive of the entire season. Not only did USC come into the game as huge underdogs, they also had to win this one on the road. While this was a roller coaster of a game for Darnold, throwing 2 touchdowns but also throwing 2 interceptions, USC came out on top by a final score of 26-13. This game put him on the map, one of the most promising young talents at the quarterback position in all of college football. USC went on to finish their 2016 campaign against Penn State in the Rose Bowl. This was more or less a home game for the Trojans, with the game taking place roughly 15 miles away from their home stadium. Despite this, they faced a very tough opponent in the Nittany Lions, who at the time had a star running back by the name of Saquon Barkley and a great receiver you might recognize by the name of Chris Godwin. This game wound up being a shootout, with both sides combining for 101 points. It came down to the wire, but Darnold reached a new level in this game, came up clutch. It was by far his best performance of the season, and it came on one of the biggest stages. He looked far more like a seasoned vet than someone who was coming off the bench at the beginning of the year. By the end of this game, he had totaled an impressive 453 yards and 5 touchdowns through the air, while only throwing 1 interception on his 53 pass attempts. USC narrowly came out on top by a final score of 52-49, and if the game against Washington didn't put Darnold on everybody's radar, this coming out party in the Rose Bowl certainly did. He finished the season throwing for 3,086 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, while picking up an additional 250 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Heading into his redshirt sophomore year at USC, the hype for Darnold was at an all-time high. He came out of nowhere the previous season to become one of the top quarterbacks in all of college football. Many projected with Darnold at the helm, USC was going to be one of the toughest teams to beat, and they entered the season as the 4th ranked team in the country. While they had a cakewalk in week number 1 to open up the season against Western Michigan, Darnold greatly struggled, failing to find the end zone through the air and being picked off 2 times. Despite the rough opening day performance from their quarterback, the Trojans still won that game 49-31. Their first real test of the year came in the following week against 14th ranked Stanford. This wound up being a huge blowout in USC's favor, coming out on top by a final score of 42-24. Darnold looked like an entirely different player in this game compared to the week prior, throwing for over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. While the Trojans hung around a top 5 ranking, the house of cards began to fall when they took on 16th ranked Washington State. This was another rough day from Darnold through the air, failing for the second time this season to throw for a touchdown. Along with this, the rest of the team was unable to pick up the slack, and USC fell by a final score of 30-27. This tough loss dropped them all the way down to 14th in the top 25 rankings. It was a couple of weeks before they got a chance to redeem themselves in another top 15 matchup, getting their chance against 13th ranked Notre Dame. But unfortunately, once again, they failed to seize the moment. This time, USC was dismantled, falling by a final score of 49-14. It's very tough to try to pin the entire loss on Darnold here. He did have a decent showing against a very talented Notre Dame defense, throwing for 229 yards and 2 touchdowns. This loss, though, more or less guaranteed that the Trojans were not going to make the college football playoffs in what was set to be a year of destiny for them. While they failed to make the playoffs, they did make an appearance in the Cotton Bowl, taking on 5th ranked Ohio State. This was a star-studded Buckeye defense that featured 3 future top 5 picks in Nick Bosa, Chase Young, and Denzel Ward. While Denzel Ward ultimately sat out of this game, Ohio State still featured an elite pass rush that made Darnold's final game at USC one that he would rather forget.
Design rollout for Darnold. Behind Burnett. Another blitz. A rollout for Darnold. Off his back foot to the sideline. Incomplete. Third down and long. Darnold under pressure and sacked. Sam Hubbard again. Man rush. Darnold under pressure. Hit from behind. The ball's out. Is it another USC giveaway?
This was a very sour note for him to go out on, throwing for 356 yards, 0 touchdowns, and an interception. Along with this, USC was buried by a final score of 24-7. Despite the rough end of the year, Darnold still had a very great season, finishing his 2017 campaign recording 4,143 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions through the air, while picking up an additional 82 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. He led the Pac-12 in passing yards, but he also led the conference in interceptions as well. Heading into the 2018 NFL Draft, scouts could not get enough of Darnold. He was given a 7.1 prospect rank out of 8 by NFL.com, and he was deemed a future Pro Bowl talent. Many believe that he was set to be a top 3 pick, with some going as far to say that he could go number 1 off the board. He was drawing comparisons to Andrew Luck at the time, and it also seemed guaranteed that Darnold was well on his way to being the future face of a franchise. After the Cleveland Browns and New York Giants selected Baker Mayfield and Saquon Barkley respectively, the New York Jets did not hesitate at all to snatch up Darnold with the 3rd overall pick. Now, many believe that the Jets could not have found a better player with this pick, and they just found their franchise quarterback here. However, knowing what we know now, this pick was a blown opportunity, with the team passing on both Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Darnold's NFL debut took place in week number 1 when the Jets took on the Lions. This game was a solid start for Darnold, throwing for 198 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. He looked like the real deal right out of the gates, and the Jets won by a huge margin, coming out on top by a final score of 48-17. But with it only being his rookie year, there was bound to be some ups and downs. Following an impressive debut, he came right back down to earth in the next 2 games against the Dolphins and the Browns. Over this 2-game stretch, Darnold was only able to find the end zone once through the air, while throwing 2 interceptions in each game.
Airs it out, downfield, pass is picked.
This continued to be an up and down season throughout the first half of the year, before he eventually hit rock bottom in week 9 when New York took on Miami for the 2nd time. This was one of the worst games of Darnold's entire career at any level.
A throw on 1st down, taking a deep shot for Curse, and it's nearly intercepted. Darnold on a slant, almost intercepted. Darnold to Curse, he dropped it.
He had no answer for the Dolphins defense in this one, and his offensive line was not doing him any favors. He was sacked 4 times in this game.
Darnold in trouble. Darnold is sacked. Darnold nowhere to go, in trouble, and he's going down.
Was only able to complete 53.9% of his pass attempts, failed to throw for a touchdown, and was picked off 4 times.
Is coming. Darnold steps up, picked off. McDonald on the run. Throws it deep in the direction of Curse, and it's intercepted.
But the cherry on top, despite the inability of Darnold to get anything going, the Jets defense still kept them in this game until the very end. They only ended up losing 13-6. He missed the following 3 games with a sprained foot injury, and in the following few games that he returned in, he had to go head-to-head with Josh Allen, Deshaun Watson, and Aaron Rodgers. A rookie Darnold surprisingly held his own in each of these 3 matchups, especially against the Packers, where he torched them for 341 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, setting a season high in passing yards and tying his season high in passing touchdowns.
Darnold to McGuire. Elijah McGuire inside the 5, the end zone.
Despite this very promising performance from Darnold, the Jets still went home with a 44-38 loss. While his rookie season definitely had its low points, it wound up being a solid showing from a rookie quarterback, throwing for 2,865 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions. The 2019 season was one that was remembered much less favorably for Darnold than it actually was. Following a solid opening week to the season, he missed the next 3 games after he caught mono. While he had a very solid comeback from this in week number 6 against Dallas, arguably the lowest point of his entire career came in the next game against the Patriots. While in the past, he had some of his biggest performances when the lights were the brightest, like his elite showing against Penn State in the Rose Bowl, Darnold did not show up in this Monday night matchup against a very tough, undefeated New England Patriots team. This was even worse than his game against the Dolphins the year prior.
Pressure off the edge. Ball is out, and the Patriots have it. Kyle Van Noy on the return. Inside the 5 and walks it in.
He was only able to complete 34.4% of his pass attempts. To make matters somehow worse, he only mustered up 86 yards through the air and threw 4 interceptions.
Picked off again. They let him get it off. Pressure off the edge. Floater and another interception. First down inside the 2. Floated again and picked off.
It was clear that something was going on in this game, and Darnold was unfortunately caught on a hot mic telling someone that he was seeing ghosts.
Seeing ghosts.
While this is a hilarious quote, it also pointed to a bigger issue that had greatly been holding him back throughout his stint with the Jets. This being that his offensive line time and time again would keep letting him down. In one game this season, he suffered 8 sacks in a single game. The ghost that he was referring to in this quote was sensing pass rushers and feeling like he was about to get sacked when in reality, no one was there. Now, despite these ghosts throughout the season, Darnold still had one of his best statistical years. He threw for 3,024 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions while leading the Jets to a winning 7-6 record as a starter. While there were some promising moments in his first 2 years as a Jet, the same could not be said about the 2020 season. Almost everything that could have went wrong did. He suffered through a sprained shoulder for the majority of the year, and it was obvious that this was having a negative effect on his passing. He threw more interceptions than touchdowns this season and led New York to a horrendous 2-10 record as a starter. In the offseason, after just 3 years with the team, the Jets had finally seen enough and were ready to get rid of the player who was meant to be one day their franchise quarterback. Darnold was traded to the Carolina Panthers for a 2021 6th-round pick, along with a 2nd and a 4th-round pick of the 2022 draft. Many believe that a change of scenery was exactly what Darnold needed. However, he quickly proved even his biggest optimists wrong here. Somehow, he had an even worse season through the air than he did the previous year with the Jets. He once again suffered another shoulder injury that could be the explanation for why he finished the season with only 9 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. In the offseason, the Panthers traded for Baker Mayfield, and it appeared that Darnold had already played himself out of ever being a starting quarterback again. Things went from bad to worse for him when he suffered an ankle sprain that kept him on IR until week number 9.
That's one of those where you get up and you think you're okay, and you go back down because your mind says, I'm good, but your body says, you better sit back down.
Despite being healthy, Darnold still had to wait almost another month before he saw the field in any action. He looked like a completely different player, though, in his return, which was great.
He keeps Darnold to the end zone, a massive Panthers touchdown.
In his 6 starts, he led the Panthers to a 4-2 record while throwing for 1,143 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. While it appeared that the tides could finally be turning for Darnold and he may end up being a starting caliber player after all, there was not much of a market for him in free agency. This led to him signing with the San Francisco 49ers to back up Brock Purdy. While this was a much less glorious role than any other one that he's had since his freshman year of high school, he took it in stride. It appears that sitting back and learning while practicing with a bunch of elite weapons was exactly what Darnold needed. He only had 1 start in the 2023 season where he had a pretty solid showing.
Comes up throwing, Ronnie Bell, fingertip.
No longer having the pressure to turn around a dying franchise appeared to take the weight off his shoulders. He was playing much more relaxed.
Oh, they're trying to throw to that side. It's deflected and it's picked off. Darnold Couple of clutches, tight window toss. It is a touchdown to Ronnie Bell.
This past offseason, he left the 49ers and signed with the Vikings. Following an injury to McCarthy, Darnold was given the starting job, and he has proved all the doubters wrong thus far. Many believe that the Viking season had come to a premature end following that injury to their rookie quarterback. Darnold has statistically been one of the best at the position. Darnold has likely found himself a new home with the Vikings. Now, these elite performances from Darnold week after week so far have been coming out of seemingly nowhere. Even his biggest supporters probably couldn't have seen this one coming. Coming into the 2021 NFL Draft, Trevor Lawrence was seen as a surefire generational talent, leading Clemson to a 34-2 record in his time there, capping it off with a national championship. Lawrence being the #1 overall pick was as close to guaranteed as you could possibly get.
Trevor, well, we're about to make you the first overall pick in Jaguar football history. Congratulations to you.
With the first pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Trevor Lawrence, quarterback, Clemson.
But 4 years later, Trevor Lawrence isn't looking like that generational talent at all. In fact, he's just looking like any other average quarterback out there. So what exactly happened? Why is the most highly praised quarterback prospect potentially ever failing to live up to the hype? As soon as Trevor Lawrence entered high school, he was thrusted into the varsity starting quarterback role, and for good reason. As just a freshman, Lawrence passed for 3,053 yards and 26 touchdowns to just 7 interceptions. He also continued to get better and better, capping off his senior season with 3,290 yards and 41 touchdowns to only his 1 interception. Coming out of high school, Trevor Lawrence was a 5-star recruit who was regarded as one of the best high school quarterback prospects of all time. He was the #1 recruit in the 2018 class with a top 247 score of 101. Anything over 100 is considered exceptional and has the ability to become a franchise player in the future. But I guess that's just a testament to how good Lawrence really is. As I'm sure you could guess, he had his pick of any college imaginable, and in the end, he decided to commit to the prestigious Clemson University. He arrived at Clemson in 2018 as one of the most highly touted recruits in college football history. Standing in at 6 feet 6 inches tall with a rocket arm and the poise of a seasoned veteran, Lawrence was quickly labeled the future of the program. After just 4 games into his freshman season, Lawrence took over that starting quarterback spot, replacing former senior starter Kelly Bryant. And what followed was nothing short of spectacular. As just a true freshman, he put on a masterclass of quarterback play, throwing for over 3,200 yards and 30 touchdowns with only 4 interceptions, leading Clemson to an undefeated regular season.
Lawrence pass completed to 15. To the end zone and in. Lawrence, the easy pass. And that's a touchdown, Clemson.
And fun fact, his first throw was a pass to wide receiver T. Higgins, who is currently a very good player on the Cincinnati Bengals when he's actually on the field. Clemson was the #2 seed behind the powerhouse Alabama. With a first-round win against Notre Dame, Clemson and true freshman quarterback Trevor Lawrence found themselves in the college football championship. Majority of the public was betting on Alabama, led by Tua Tagovailoa, to win this game, but Lawrence put on a clinic, torching Nick Saban's defense with 347 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in a stunning 44-16 blowout victory as Clemson finished with a perfect record.
It's a shovel pass in the middle and battling his way to the end zone.
Now, Lawrence's performance was unexpected for a freshman on such a grand stage, solidifying his status as the face of college football and setting the tone for what would become a historic college career. For his sophomore season, expectations for Clemson were sky high, as you could imagine. Clemson once again dominated the regular season, and Lawrence's numbers continued to improve. He finished the year with 3,665 passing yards, 36 passing touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions. Lawrence also showed off his athleticism, rushing for a career-high 563 yards and 9 touchdowns. Clemson cruised to another undefeated regular season, winning the ACC championship and earning a spot in the college football playoff for the second straight year. Lawrence had a standout performance in the Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State, leading Clemson to a thrilling 29-23 win. In that game, Lawrence showed his dual threat abilities, rushing for a 67-yard touchdown and throwing for 2 more. In the national championship game, however, Lawrence and the Tigers finally met their match against Joe Burrow and the undefeated LSU Tigers. Lawrence struggled to find his rhythm in this one, completing just 18 of his 37 pass attempts for 234 yards and no touchdowns in a 42-25 loss. Despite the defeat, Lawrence's leadership and playmaking ability throughout the season had further solidified him as one of the best quarterbacks in college football. His record as a starter moved to 25-1, and Clemson remained a powerhouse that no team wanted to face. If he could have been declared for the NFL draft, he would have undoubtedly been the #1 overall pick at that point. But to be eligible for the draft, players must be out of high school for at least 3 years, so he was back at Clemson for what would be his final year of college football. Unfortunately, this season showed some struggles for not only college football, but the whole world. The pandemic had taken the US by storm and created uncertainty around the college football season, and Lawrence himself missed 2 games after testing positive for the virus. Despite the adversity, he continued to play at an elite level, throwing for 3,153 yards and 24 touchdowns in just 10 games, along with 8 rushing touchdowns.
Clemson playing with a lot of pace here.
And there you go, setting up the run for Lawrence. Lawrence, corner of the end zone, caught for a touchdown.
Lawrence looking for 6. Nearly intercepted, but it's caught for a touchdown.
Lawrence's leadership was on full display during this season. Not only did he lead Clemson to another ACC title, but he also became the face of college football's "We Want to Play" movement, advocating for the safety of players and for the season to continue amidst the pandemic. His maturity off the field was just as impressive as his play on it. And around this time, he proposed to his high school sweetheart on the Clemson field, so that was a pretty cool moment for him, I'm sure. As the college playoffs rolled around, Clemson once again found themselves matched up against Ohio State. But this time around, Lawrence and the Tigers were outmatched by a determined Buckeyes team led by Justin Fields, who was actually the second-ranked high school recruit in the 2018 class behind Lawrence. The Tigers fell in this one 49-28, with Lawrence throwing for 400 yards and 2 touchdowns in a losing effort. It was a disappointing end to his Clemson career, but Lawrence's legacy was already more than cemented. He declared for the NFL draft after the 2020 season, leaving Clemson with a 34-2 record as a starter, 3 ACC championships, and a national championship to his name. He threw for over 10,000 yards and accounted for 108 total touchdowns in his 3 years, and he left as one of the most accomplished and influential players not in just Clemson's history, but in all of college football history. As the NFL draft rolled around, there was no doubt about who was going to go #1. The question was, who would hold the #1 pick? The Jags and the Jets were battling all season for the #1 overall pick, but in the end, the 1-15 Jags ended up with that #1 overall pick, while the 2-14 Jets were picking right behind them. And on April 29th, 2021, the Jaguars made it official, selecting Lawrence with the first overall pick of the draft. He was viewed as the savior who could turn around this struggling franchise. New Jaguars head coach Urban Meyer was also brought on to lead the rebuild, and Lawrence was the centerpiece of that plan. Lawrence's selection did not come without challenges. He was joining a Jaguars team in need of a complete rehaul. The franchise had experienced just 1 winning season in the previous 13 years, and the roster was full of holes. Expectations were certainly high, but many analysts warned that it would take time for Lawrence to find success in the NFL, given the state of the team. And it was safe to say those analysts were right. Lawrence's highly anticipated rookie season in 2021 was loaded with different challenges and disappointments. both for him personally and the Jaguars as a franchise. With the excitement surrounding Lawrence, him being the first overall pick in the NFL draft, all of that set extremely large and unrealistic expectations to live up to, given the state of the team. But the thing is, Lawrence didn't get anywhere near living up to the hype. From the start, the Jaguars faced significant hurdles, starting with head coach Urban Meyer's controversial leadership. Meyer, who was stepping into the NFL after being a successful college coach, struggled to adapt to the professional game.
Urban Meyer is, outside of Nick Saban, to me, the best college football coach ever. He's he's a great college football coach. Oftentimes, what makes you great at one job can be your undoing in another.
His unorthodox methods, combined with his lack of experience at the NFL level, led to a very confusing and unorganized atmosphere within the organization. Meyer's coaching style alienated some players and even created friction within the locker room, which contributed to a lack of team chemistry and, of course, focus on the field. As for Lawrence, the struggles began early on. While he showed flashes of his potential, he also faced growing pains that were made even worse by the coaching instability. The Jaguars' offensive line struggled to protect him, leading to a significant number of sacks and forced throws that contributed to his high interception count.
I mean, he's double teamed on every play, and down goes Trevor Lawrence as Nick Bosa.
There's the snap. Time in the pocket, and he is going to lose the ball as he's sacked on his first play.
He finished the first season of his career with 3,641 passing yards, but only managed 12 touchdowns to his 17 interceptions, which is a disappointing stat line for any player, especially one that was so good in college and high school. The inconsistency in play calling and the lack of offensive strategy under Meyer further hurt Lawrence's ability to find rhythm in the passing game, and as the season wore on, Jaguars' frustrations got even worse. The team endured a 20-game losing streak dating back to last season, 5 of which Lawrence was accountable for. Lawrence felt the weight of the franchise's struggles on his shoulders. Instead of being the transformative figure expected to elevate the Jaguars, he found himself stuck in a losing environment that stunted his growth. Games that should have been developmental opportunities often turned into disheartening experiences as Lawrence tried to navigate the complexities of the NFL while contending with a coach whose vision for the team was increasingly being questioned. Urban Meyer's time was marked by controversies that distracted the team overall. Incidents such as his failure to return to the team after a loss to the Cincinnati Bengals and the fallout from his interactions with players and staff created a toxic atmosphere. This lack of stability and accountability ultimately hindered Lawrence's development as a rookie quarterback. These struggles led to a mounting criticism of both Meyer and the organization. Lawrence's potential as a franchise quarterback was overshadowed by the overarching narrative of a coach who didn't seem to be prepared for the challenges of the NFL, marking the end of an era that many felt never truly even began. For Lawrence, his rookie year was disappointing as he knew he could perform at a higher level with the right support and structure around him. Because of this, Trevor Lawrence and Jaguar fans entered the 2022 season with new hope. They had just hired Doug Peterson, who was a Super Bowl winning coach with the Eagles, to replace Urban Meyer. And that shift in leadership brought a sense of stability and structure to the organization finally. Peterson's experience and knowledge in the NFL were expected to help Lawrence develop into that franchise quarterback that the Jaguars envisioned when they selected him first overall in that 2021 draft. Now, this season started off rather poorly though, as the Jags dropped to just 2-6. But as the season progressed, Lawrence demonstrated significant improvement in his play every single game. The coaching staff focused on building a scheme that emphasized short to intermediate passing, allowing Lawrence to utilize his quick release and accuracy while also developing a rhythm with his receiving core. He showcased increased confidence in the pocket, improved decision-making, and was getting better at reading the defenses. Lawrence finished the 2022 season with 4,113 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions, which was much better than his rookie year. A main highlight from his sophomore season came in Week 15 against Dallas. This was a must-win game to keep the Jags' playoff hopes alive, and Lawrence did everything he could to make that happen. He threw for 318 yards and 4 touchdowns while leading Jacksonville back from a 17-point deficit at one point in this game. They escaped with a 6-point win in overtime, 40-34.
Lawrence
Looks, taps the ball over the middle. It's caught for the touchdown. Pressure coming, rolls away, steps in, has a man. Diving for the end zone, touchdown! Lawrence lofting end zone, caught for the touchdown! Lawrence pump throws, caught for the touchdown!
Another defining moment for Lawrence came in the regular season finale against the Titans, where he threw for 212 yards, securing a playoff spot for the Jags in a thrilling 20-16 win. He developed strong relationships with his teammates, particularly the newly acquired wide receiver Christian Kirk and tight end Evan Ingram. This chemistry paid huge dividends as Lawrence connected with both players frequently throughout the season, helping to create a more dynamic offense. As the regular season drew to a close, the Jaguars had transformed from a struggling team to being an AFC South contender, ultimately finishing the season with a 9-8 record. Lawrence's growth was evident, and he emerged as a promising young quarterback with a bright future ahead. The best moment of his sophomore season came in the playoffs, where he faced off against the Chargers once again in the wildcard round. In a thrilling matchup, Lawrence put together a remarkable performance, throwing for 288 yards and 4 touchdowns, leading the Jags to a historic 31-30 comeback victory. The game started off pretty rough as the Jags found themselves down 27-0 due to 4 Trevor Lawrence interceptions in the first half.
And it's paid off the fake, that's knocked away, it's deflected, and it's intercepted. Here comes extra pressure, but the pass is intercepted. Lawrence throws, and again it's intercepted. 3rd and 10. In the pocket, fires, and that is going to be picked again.
But they weren't ready to give up that easy, as Lawrence followed this up with 4 touchdown passes as well as a diving 2-point conversion to cut the lead to 30-28.
In the pocket, fires, and that'll be caught for the touchdown. Lawrence looking under pressure, throws wide open, making the catch. 2. And Lawrence reaches over and scores.
And with a little over 3 minutes left on the clock, the Jags marched down the field for the game-winning drive, ending in a field goal to win as the time expired.
Here we go for the win.
This win not only marked the Jaguars' first playoff victory since 2017, but also established Lawrence as a player capable of leading his team in high-stakes situations. Their next opponent in the playoffs was a very tough Kansas City Chiefs team, who were of course led by Patrick Mahomes. Now this game was a nail-biter. Mahomes injured his ankle late in the first quarter and missed the rest of the first half, but the Jaguars just couldn't take advantage of this. It was 10-7 when Mahomes left the game after a field goal drive, but on the Chiefs' next possession, the Jaguars gave up a 98-yard touchdown drive to backup quarterback Chad Henne, aided by a roughing the passer call against defensive lineman Arden Key and giving up a 39-yard run to Isaiah Pacheco. The Jaguars clawed their way back within 3 points early in the fourth quarter with a 4-yard touchdown run by Travis Etienne, set up by Trevor Lawrence's 37-yard strike to Zay Jones, and an 18-yard reverse play by Christian Kirk. But the Chiefs' lead was back up to 10 after Mahomes, on his bum ankle, engineered a 10-play, 75-yard touchdown drive to put Kansas City back up 27-17 midway through the final period. I guess this is just one of the reasons why many people are calling this guy the GOAT, huh? That's up for debate, though. Then the Jaguars collapsed and had consecutive turnovers. Receiver Jamal Agnew fumbled at the 3-yard line, and then Lawrence was picked off by cornerback Jalen Watson. In the end, the Jaguars took a tough 27-20 loss. But a playoff appearance and a playoff win in just his second year in the NFL was not something to be upset about at all. Coming into the 2023 season, Jaguar fans had hope once again. They were building a pretty good team around Lawrence with players such as Christian Kirk, Travis Etienne, Evan Ingram, and then adding Calvin Ridley in the offseason. They were looking like they had the potential to be possible Super Bowl contenders. And for the beginning of the year, the Jags looked dominant. They got off to an impressive 8-3 start, but then they collapsed. A team that was supposed to be Super Bowl contenders went just 1-5 in their last 6 games, missing out on the playoffs. Lawrence didn't hit that breakout stride that he was expected to. Sure, he had a pretty good year, throwing for 4,016 yards with a completion percentage of 65.6%, achieving 21 touchdowns while throwing 14 interceptions. But he just didn't develop into the generational status that many fans were hoping for and expecting. But beside all that, the Jaguars still saw him as their starting quarterback of the future, and they gave him a massive 5-year, $275 million contract extension heading into the 2024 season. The season that he was finally going to break out and prove that he's a generational talent, right? Well, not quite. At the time of recording this, we are 7 weeks into the NFL season, and the Jags look downright awful. They're sitting at 2-5, which is one of the worst records in the NFL, not to mention how they started off the season 0-4. Trevor Lawrence has looked like a low-tier starting quarterback at best, and if you have him in fantasy football, forget about it. I'm sure you are not happy with his performances. I just have no idea what's going on with this team. Most of their core consists of young guys, and they really didn't lose a ton of their key pieces. They also went out and drafted star wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU with the 23rd overall pick, who is panning out very nicely, I must say, and signed wide receiver Gabe Davis. Both moves were supposed to help out this receiving core. Sure, they ended up losing out on Calvin Ridley in the offseason, but he wasn't performing at the level he was expected to last season either. This team was expected to be Super Bowl contenders or at least a playoff team, but so far they are looking downright awful. Sure, they've had some difficult games against the Dolphins, Bills, and Texans, but then they lose to the Browns, who are arguably the worst team in football. Cleveland's sitting at just 1-6, with their only win being against the Jags, which is pretty embarrassing. And their 2 wins haven't really proven too much to me. They beat a mediocre Colts team who was missing their best player in Jonathan Taylor, then beat a Patriots team in London led by Drake May in his first career start. 2 weeks back, they got dismantled by a Caleb Williams-led Bears team who still has a ton to learn, but they are looking much better than the Jags at this point. There were a lot of drops by Jags players in this one, but still, Trevor Lawrence is going to have to play a lot better if they want to win these games. I'm not personally ready to give up on Trevor Lawrence just yet. I still think he has the potential to lead the Jags to a deep playoff run in the future. Like I said, not this year though. I think they're going to miss the playoffs personally. But something that people have to realize is that Lawrence just turned 25 years old a few days before posting this video. He still has a ton of time to grow. We've recently seen a lot of quarterbacks break out late, such as Geno Smith, who had an awful early career with the Jets before being backups on the Giants and Chargers, and then finally the Seahawks before getting to start there, and he's looking, pretty good right now. Or Baker Mayfield, who had one good year in Cleveland before struggling and then rotting away in Carolina before having a crazy comeback and redeeming his career in Tampa Bay. And now we see Sam Darnold, who was stuck on the Jets and the Panthers, both places that seem to be themes for struggling quarterbacks, before going to the 49ers, being a backup there, and then to the Vikings this offseason where he actually got to start. He's looking incredible so far, with the Vikings being one of the best teams at a shocking 5-2. So before you decide to freak out about Trevor Lawrence, just remember he is still young, has a lot of time to grow and develop. He's also shown plenty of flashes of greatness, and I also believe that he is a guy you should be building your organization around. This Jags team is still very young. With some age and some more star power, I think they could be a serious threat in a couple of years. But I want to know what you guys think. Is Trevor Lawrence just a mediocre quarterback, or does he still have some untapped generational potential? And could you see him leading the Jags to a Super Bowl in the future? Patrick Mahomes is, without a doubt, the best quarterback in the NFL right now. And usually in sports, when someone is the best at a certain position, they're going to have victims. Not criminal victims, but players that can't seem to beat them consistently or just keep getting their dreams crushed time and time again by that one certain player. Today, that player is Patrick Mahomes, and we're covering the main guys that can't seem to figure him out and win.
What is it about that kind of matchup that you really like? What is it about competing against him that you really like?
I don't like competing against him at all.
Let's start off today with Action Jackson, Lamar Jackson in the Baltimore Ravens. You're probably sitting here thinking, how in the world is this unanimous MVP from 2019 a victim of Patrick Mahomes? Well, let's start in week 3 of the 2019 season and see if we can't notice a pattern. So we started off hot for the Ravens in this game. The run game was absolutely cooking, not just the running backs, but also Lamar on the ground. And before we continue, these are two completely different teams in terms of style of football that they want to play. And it's always been that way since these two quarterbacks have gone at it. The Ravens want to run the ball down your throat, while the Chiefs might only run the ball 10 total times in the game. Regardless, Baltimore looked great to start off this game, and fans might have been getting a little bit too excited watching them take the lead early. But of course, this would not last. Mahomes had Kelce to lean on during this game. Demarcus Robinson made a spectacular catch in the end zone, and Mecole Hardman was doing his part as well, stepping up huge. But on the opposite side of the ball, you had Lamar Jackson backpacking the team. Nobody was getting open in this game. He did everything he could in this one with his legs, and even made an unbelievable crossbody throw to Willie Snead towards the end of this game, but that didn't matter because Mahomes just simply outclassed him. You could try and blame it on the fact that Lamar had less weapons, but was that even really true in this game? Tyreek was hurt and didn't play in this one. So you had Mark Andrews, Hollywood Brown, and Willie Snead on the Ravens against Travis Kelce, Mecole Hardman, and Sammy Watkins on the Chiefs. I think you have to give this one to Mahomes, and it was simply an experience difference in my eyes. That one extra year that Mahomes had on Jackson made a huge difference. And don't forget, 2019 was the year that Lamar won MVP. Fast forward now to week number 2 of the 2021 season. Lamar would get the better of Mahomes here for the only time in his young career up to this point. And even though they won this game, there were still some glaring issues at hand. Jackson started off this game by throwing a pick six, and then later in the game, he forced a throw into triple coverage for his second interception. The difference here is that Mahomes made the smarter throws, the smarter decisions overall. That is, up until he didn't.
Three-man rush, and there comes the fourth late, and the pass is picked off.
This was a costly mistake for Mahomes, and one that he's not known for doing often. Lamar was once again carrying the Ravens with his legs and doing everything he could to pull out this win, but the Chiefs still should have won this game at the end of the day. Clyde Edwards-Helaire made a huge mistake, fumbling the ball inside field goal range during the Chiefs' final drive that most likely would have won them the game. Lamar winning this game meant a lot for him though, and he played his heart out, so you got to give him a lot of credit. You could tell he made some massive strides since their first meeting in 2019, but Mahomes would get the last laugh in this situation. This most recent AFC championship in the 2023-24 season is a perfect example. It was far from pretty, but those quarterbacks were in a battle. Lamar was catching his own passes over here. Mahomes was dotting up Kelce in the end zone back shoulder, but ultimately Zay Flowers played a huge role in the Ravens losing this game with the fumble on the goal line and the taunting penalty. But at the same time, he kept them in the game in the first place by getting open and having a long touchdown early on. Towards the end of the game, Lamar once again showed his inexperience in the big situation, forcing another pass into triple coverage when they were driving downfield, and they had a solid chance at making this comeback and winning the game. That has been the main difference so far between Mahomes and Jackson up to this point. Mahomes has been in those big moments, and a lot of them. He steps up to deliver almost every single time, while Jackson just has not. I will say one thing though, when the Chiefs and Ravens play, it's almost always a good game, and there aren't many fights. You can't say the same about our next victim, Max Crosby and the Raiders. Crosby is the only player in this video that plays defense, which might not seem like a big deal at the moment, but he clearly doesn't have as much leverage over a team's overall success as an opposing quarterback might have. You can only do so much for the Raiders defense, and with all that being said, he is still Patrick Mahomes' main victim on this team. Let's pick it up with our first example, week number 10 of the 2021 season. I know I put Max Crosby on here, but this was an offensive masterclass by Mahomes that the entire Raiders defense just couldn't stop. To sum it up for you without playing the entire game, Tyreek Hill went crazy, and Travis Kelce was just being Travis Kelce. The outlier here was Darrell Williams, the running back at the time. And I wasn't kidding when I said the Chiefs don't like to run the ball earlier. This was a game that they were winning almost the entire time, and the starting running back still only had 11 carries. But he did catch 9 passes for 101 yards, and this play right here sums up the Raiders' night on defense perfectly. The really depressing part about the Raiders' efforts to stop Mahomes during this game was that they didn't even get one sack or an interception. There was just nothing they could do, and Patrick ended up throwing for 5 touchdowns on that night. Now, that's pretty bad, right? But on the famous night in 2022, Max Crosby woke up the beast in Mahomes, which was pretty funny looking back on things. I mean, the Raiders pulled out to a 17-0 lead early in the second quarter, and you could tell the Chiefs weren't fully focused at that point in time, that the Raiders had a real chance of winning that game. But Mahomes turned on a switch, and that fight broke out after they came back to eventually take the lead late in the third quarter, 23-20. That turned into a meme pretty quickly once the fight was released as a part of the quarterback Netflix documentary, where you can see Mahomes saying, I'm here, over and over while Andy Reid is trying to calm him down. By this point, it's too late, Andy, all right? You can't contain this man. He's going crazy out here. Mahomes finished that game off with 292 yards, 4 touchdowns, along with 0 interceptions, but Crosby did play his part in this game. I'll have to give him that. 2 sacks and 4 total tackles. It wasn't enough to beat the Chiefs, though, and we have to classify Crosby as a victim here because you can't trash talk Patrick Mahomes and then lose the game. You can't trash talk anybody like that and then lose the game. Now, the same can't be said about our next victim, Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Hold on. Justin Herbert's calling my phone right now. He wants to tell me something. Oh, he said to make sure you guys subscribe to Fantasy Phenoms. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, Justin. Thanks. Since early in the 2021 season, Herbert just cannot beat Mahomes for some reason. It's been known that if you watch the NFL on a regular basis, the Chargers just can't win close games. Since 2021, I would be shocked if the Chargers haven't lost the most amount of one-score games out of any team in the entire league, meaning they lost by a touchdown or less. That's a very painful trend to be a part of if you're a Chargers fan. And our first example in Week 15 of the 2021 season perfectly captures that feeling. This game started out just as heartbreaking as it ended for Chargers fans. They were at the 5-yard line on 3rd and goal. First, it was Mike Williams who couldn't come up with the catch and get them into the end zone. And then Donald Parham had the ball in his hands on 4th down, only to smash his head off the ground, give himself a concussion, and drop the pass, turning the ball over on downs for them. This play right here, though, with about 30 seconds left, if this throw to Keenan Allen is not out of bounds, I think they win this game. If Justin Herbert gives Keenan Allen a shot to catch this ball, I believe he does, and they win this game. That is the story of every Justin Herbert game against the Chiefs. The chances are there, but the capitalization is not. And don't get me started on that defense. I mean, Week 11 in the 2022 season, Chargers are up 27-23 with less than 2 minutes left in the game. Herbert is having a great game. 2 passing touchdowns, 280 yards, and they have the lead for a good portion of these games. The ball just always ends up in Mahomes' hands towards the end with way too much time left, and the defense can't do anything about it. Then by the time Herbert has the ball back in his hands, there's less than 30 seconds, and he is asked to do something that very few quarterbacks can pull off consistently. It just so happens the guy he's going against does that extremely well and extremely often, to the point where it's almost expected. You're in a situation where you either get Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes in the clutch. Nobody's picking Justin Herbert right now. I don't care if you're the biggest Chargers fan in the world. There is just no way that you're picking Justin Herbert over Patrick Mahomes. Therefore, Justin Herbert is victim number 3. And I could move on to Mahomes' biggest victim right now. But first, I want to give an honorable mention to the entire Denver Broncos team, because Mahomes has a record of 12-1 against them throughout his career. That one loss just happened the last time they met, too, so the tide could be turning here, but I highly doubt it. By far, in my eyes, the biggest victim of Patrick Mahomes is none other than Josh Allen and the Bills. And it's in the worst way possible every single time, knocking them out of the playoffs. Josh Allen, as you probably know, if you watch football regularly, is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. There's no denying that. The reason you don't hear people making the argument that Josh Allen is better than Mahomes is that he can't beat him in the playoffs, plain and simple. Let's start with the AFC Championship game in the 2020-21 season. The Bills started off this game hot, but then they fell completely flat after their 9-0 start in the first quarter. They were getting into field goal range and just kept having to settle for 3 points instead of 6, which was a huge problem at the end of the day for them. On the other side of the ball, Mahomes and the Chiefs were doing the exact opposite, cashing in on their opportunities, at least coming away with some points almost every single time down the field. 325 passing yards and 3 touchdowns for Mahomes compared to Allen's 287 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. To keep it a buck with you guys, this game was never really too close, and it didn't feel close the majority of the game. This was certainly not the case, though, the next time that these two teams met in the playoffs.
Rex, you're 59 years old. Have you ever seen anything like that?
No, and I've been a fan of this game forever and coached it for 30 years. Never, ever in my life have I seen a better game.
January 23rd, 2022, AFC divisional round game. Basically set the tone up until this point in time in 2024. Josh Allen played an incredible game. Gabe Davis played an incredible game. But at the end of the day, all that really matters is who came out on top. The Chiefs got the ball in overtime first, and Bills fans were outraged about how this game ended up playing out. This game sparked a rule change where both teams now get to touch the ball in overtime in the playoffs. Mahomes finished that game with 378 yards, 4 total touchdowns, and 0 turnovers. We're talking about a guy here that knows how to take care of the football in the clutch extremely well. Now, this most recent divisional round matchup in 2024 between the two was yet another chance for Allen and the Bills to take down Mahomes. Lucky number 3, at least you would hope. And I got to give the Bills some major credit here. They were sticking around with the lead, even though this was probably the best Chiefs team defensively that we have seen over the past couple of seasons. I mean, the Chiefs would always outscore you with their offense in the past, but this season was a bit different. I know Mahomes has really turned it up in the postseason so far. Just a couple of weeks ago, though, the defense was carrying this team hard. So for Allen to be leading the Bills out there was definitely promising to see. The main reason Mahomes was so good in this game, though, was his usage of scrambling, specifically this one play where he fakes out a defender and runs up the sideline for about 30 or so yards. Those types of plays are extremely hard to teach, and not anybody can do it. Josh Allen, however, was not done, though. He was not ready to let Mahomes take another win out from under his belt. Beautiful play to Shakir gave them a 24-20 lead, and it was looking like this would finally be the year where Allen outduels Mahomes. That is just until a few minutes later when Isaiah Pacheco scored. Now the Bills are in a make-or-break situation here, 5.5 minutes on the clock, when Josh Allen makes a huge mistake that almost cost the Bills this game. Thankfully, they got another chance and made it into field goal range. Let me just remind you up to this point, Mahomes once again doesn't have a turnover on the biggest stages of them all. Allen hasn't turned the ball over either in this one. Finally playing the game that every Bills fan needed him to up to this point. It's 27-24, and Tyler Bass is about to tie the game with a field goal.
44 yards, Bass. No, he doesn't make it.
Even when Josh Allen does everything right, Mahomes still comes out with the win. Now, people are going to have many different things to say. The penalties, the no calls, whatever the case might be, Mahomes just cannot be beat consistently on the biggest stages.